Every feeling you've been holding, every thought you keep revisiting, every quiet tension living in your body, none of it appeared by accident. It built slowly, layer by layer, moment by moment. And most of the time, you didn't even notice it happening. You just learned to live with it, to function around it, to call it normal. But when the world finally grows still, when the lights are off and the noise fades, that weight speaks, not loudly, just honestly. You've spent so much of your life holding on, holding it together, holding your reactions back, holding on to memories that shaped you, expectations that pressure you, futures that haven't arrived. Not because you wanted to, but because letting go was never explained to you. You were taught how to survive, not how to release, how to endure, not how to soften. And yet, somewhere inside you, there's a quiet readiness, a sense that it's time to loosen your grip. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that suffering doesn't come from events, but from attachment to thoughts about events. That peace begins the moment you stop arguing with reality. That letting go is not giving up, it's returning your energy to where it belongs, to the present, to what you can control, to your own inner balance. When the mind stops clinging, the heart begins to breathe again. This meditation is not about forcing calm, not about fixing yourself, not about becoming someone new. It's about releasing what no longer needs to stay. Old emotional weight, old stories, old resistance, gently, patiently, without judgment. Over the next 3 hours, you're invited to rest your mind, slow your thoughts, and allow clarity to replace tension. One breath, one moment at a time. There is nothing you need to do right now, nothing to prove, nothing to solve. Just let yourself be here. Let yourself listen. Let yourself loosen the grip you've been holding for far too long. This is your time to let go. The quiet you've just stepped into doesn't ask you to change anything yet. It only asks you to stay. To notice how often your mind reaches outward, toward explanation, toward approval, toward being seen the right way. Before anything is released, it helps to see what has been held. And one of the heaviest things most people carry is the need to be understood. There is a subtle exhaustion that comes from always explaining yourself. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up as tension in the chest after conversations, as replayed moments in your mind where you wish you had said something better, as the urge to clarify, correct, justify, defend. Over time, this need becomes automatic. You speak not to express, but to secure agreement. You act not from alignment, but from hope. Hope that someone will finally see you clearly and respond in a way that makes you feel settled inside. The need to be understood often begins innocently. It grows from being misunderstood early in life, from not being heard when it mattered, from learning that love, safety, or respect came only after explanation. So you learn to translate yourself, to soften your truth, to package your thoughts carefully so they would be accepted. And each time understanding did not arrive, you tried harder, more words, more reasoning, more emotional effort. What no one tells you is that this effort slowly changes your emotional state to other people's perceptions. Your peace starts depending on their reactions. If they nod, you relax. If they question you, tension returns. If they disagree, your nervous system reads it as danger. Without realizing it, you hand over authority of your inner world to minds you cannot control. The Stoics saw this pattern clearly. They understood that the desire to be understood is not about clarity, it is about control. It is the hope that if others see things your way, you will finally feel safe. But safety that depends on external agreement is fragile. It disappears the moment someone misunderstands you again, and they will. Not because they are cruel or careless, but because every person hears through their own wounds, beliefs, and limits. The Stoic approach does not ask you to stop caring. It asks you to stop chasing certainty from unstable sources. Other people's understanding is unstable. It shifts with their mood, their experiences, their fears. Anchoring your emotional peace to it is like trying to rest on moving water. This is where silence enters, not as withdrawal, but as strength. Stoic silence is not the absence of expression, it is the presence of choice. It is the moment you realize you do not need to explain yourself to feel valid, that your inner alignment does not require external confirmation. When you stop needing to be understood, something unexpected happens. Your mind relaxes. Conversations feel lighter. You listen more deeply because you are no longer preparing defenses. You speak more honestly because you are no longer shaping words to be liked. Silence becomes spacious instead of tense. Many people fear this silence because they confuse it with invisibility. They believe that if they stop explaining, they will be erased. But the opposite is true. When you stop forcing yourself into being understood, your presence becomes clearer. You stop performing. You stop over-adjusting. What remains is grounded, steady, real. The Stoics taught that your judgments, not other people's opinions, are the source of emotional disturbance. When someone misunderstands you, the event itself is neutral. The pain comes from the story that follows. They don't see me. That means I'm not valued. That means I'm unsafe. Once you see this chain, you can interrupt it. You are allowed to be misunderstood and still be at peace. This is not indifference. It is maturity. It is knowing that being right, being seen, and being calm are not the same thing, and choosing calm. Over time, the need to be understood becomes a habit of tension. You anticipate misunderstanding before it even happens. You explain yourself preemptively. You over-communicate, hoping to prevent discomfort. But this only reinforces the belief that misunderstanding is dangerous. It keeps your nervous system alert, scanning for signs of rejection. Stoic practice invites you to test a different response, to allow misunderstanding without rushing to correct it, to let silence sit where explanation used to live. At first, this can feel uncomfortable. The body expects action, the mind expects defense. But if you stay with the discomfort, it begins to dissolve. You realize nothing terrible happens. You are still whole, still safe, still yourself. Freedom appears quietly here, not as confidence that everyone will get you, but as confidence that it no longer matters if they don't. This freedom gives your energy back. You stop leaking attention into endless clarification. You stop carrying conversations long after they end. Your mind becomes yours again. This does not mean you never speak. It means you speak from intention, not hunger, from clarity, not need. When words come from this place, they are fewer, calmer, and more precise. And if they are misunderstood, you do not collapse inward. You let the misunderstanding exist without attaching your worth to it. One of the deepest shifts happens when you realize that being understood was never the cure you hoped it would be. Even when people did understand you, the relief was temporary. Another conversation came, another doubt, another explanation. The peace never lasted because it was borrowed. Stoic silence teaches you to generate peace internally, to rest in alignment rather than approval. to accept that others will see you through their lens, and that this is not a problem to solve. It is a condition of being human. When you release the need to be understood, you also release the fear of being misjudged. You stop rehearsing explanations in your mind. You stop adjusting your truth for comfort. You allow yourself to be as you are, without commentary. This is not coldness. It is honesty without desperation. It is warmth without dependence. It is self-respect expressed quietly. As this lesson settles, notice how often your mind reaches for validation. Not to fight it, just to see it. Awareness is already a form of release. Each time you choose not to explain, not to correct, not to prove, you loosen the grip a little more. And in that loosening, space opens, space for calm, space for clarity, space for a deeper kind of freedom that does not need witnesses. This is how letting go begins, not with force, not with denial, but with the quiet decision to stop chasing what was never stable to begin with. As the need to be understood loosens its grip, something quieter takes its place. A strange openness, fewer inner arguments, less explaining, and then, almost immediately, a new concern often rises. If I stop caring so much, will I stop feeling at all? This is where many people hesitate. They sense relief approaching, but fear that peace will cost them their depth, that calm will harden them, that letting go will turn them cold. This is the misunderstanding that has kept Stoicism wrongly labeled for centuries. There is a difference, an essential one, between emotional detachment and emotional clarity. One shuts the heart down. The other clears the fog so the heart can finally see. Emotional detachment is usually born from overwhelm. It happens when feelings become too intense, too confusing, or too painful to process. The mind responds by pulling away. It numbs, it distances, it builds walls. This kind of detachment often looks calm from the outside, but inside there is dullness, heaviness, and quiet fatigue. Life loses color. Joy feels muted. Pain feels distant but unresolved. Nothing moves, but nothing heals either. Stoicism does not teach this kind of withdrawal. In fact, the Stoics warned against it. They understood that suppressing emotion does not dissolve suffering, it stores it. What is pushed down does not disappear. It waits. It leaks out as irritability, bitterness, restlessness, or emptiness. Emotional clarity, on the other hand, does not avoid feeling. It changes how feeling is held. It allows emotions to pass through awareness without becoming commands. You still feel sadness, anger, disappointment, and joy, but they no longer dictate your identity or your actions. They are experienced fully, then released naturally, without resistance and without clinging. This distinction matters because many people trying to let go unknowingly aim for numbness. They want relief so badly that they attempt to shut off emotion entirely. When that happens, suffering may quiet temporarily, but meaning goes with it. Connection fades, presence weakens, life feels distant. Stoic clarity keeps you awake, not frozen. It keeps you sensitive, not fragile. It allows emotion to exist without letting it take control of the inner steering wheel. The Stoics believed that emotions are not the problem. The problem is confusion about emotions. When a feeling arises, most people merge with it instantly. Anger becomes, I am angry. Fear becomes, I am unsafe. Sadness becomes, I am broken. The emotion stops being a signal and becomes an identity. This fusion is what creates suffering. Emotional clarity breaks this fusion. It introduces a small but powerful pause. a space where you notice what you feel without becoming it. In that space, emotion can be understood instead of feared. When anger appears, clarity says, something feels threatened. When sadness appears, clarity says, something mattered. When fear appears, clarity says, the mind is predicting danger. None of these require suppression, none require indulgence, they require presence. The Stoics trained themselves to observe internal reactions the same way one might observe weather passing through the sky. Storms move in, storms move out. The sky does not panic. It does not cling to sunshine or fight rain. It allows conditions to change without losing its openness. This does not make the sky indifferent, it makes it stable. One of the biggest sources of emotional suffering is resistance, the inner demand that feelings should not be happening. Thoughts like, I shouldn't feel this way, I should be over this by now. This emotion means something is wrong with me. These judgments tighten the emotional body. They turn pain into struggle. Emotional clarity removes this second layer. It allows emotion to exist without commentary, without self-attack, without urgency to fix. This is why Stoic calm feels different from emotional shutdown. There is warmth in it, aliveness, a grounded softness. You are present enough to feel deeply, but steady enough not to drown. Another misunderstanding comes from confusing emotional clarity with emotional distance. People fear that if they stop reacting intensely, they will stop caring. But caring does not require chaos. Love does not require anxiety. Compassion does not require exhaustion. In fact, emotional clarity often deepens care. When you are no longer overwhelmed by your own reactions, you have more space for others. You listen better. You respond more thoughtfully. You feel without being consumed. Detachment says, I don't want to feel this. Clarity says, I can feel this without losing myself. This shift is subtle, but life-changing. The Stoics emphasize the difference between what happens and the meaning we assign to it. Emotions often arise from interpretations, not events themselves. When those interpretations are examined calmly, emotions soften on their own. Not because they were pushed away, but because the mind stopped feeding them. For example, grief does not come only from loss. It comes from the story that life should not have changed this way. When that resistance relaxes, grief remains, but it becomes clean grief. It flows, it moves, it does not harden into despair. Anger does not come only from injustice. It comes from the belief that reality must align with your expectations. When that belief loosens, anger loses its fuel. What remains is clarity about what matters and what can be done. This is not passive acceptance. It is intelligent engagement. You still act when action is needed, but you act from steadiness, not emotional urgency. Emotional detachment avoids pain by shrinking experience. Emotional clarity expands experience without letting pain dominate it. One leads to numbness, the other leads to freedom. This is why Stoicism places so much emphasis on awareness. You cannot clarify what you refuse to see. You cannot release what you will not feel. True letting go happens through contact, not avoidance. When emotions are allowed to rise and fall naturally, they complete their cycle. When they are resisted or suppressed, they stagnate. They turn into long-term tension, into identity, into suffering. Clarity invites a different relationship. Feelings become visitors, not residents. They arrive, communicate, and leave. This relationship changes how you experience life's difficulties. Pain still appears, but it is cleaner. sharper, shorter. It does not echo endlessly in the mind. It does not define who you are. And joy changes too. It becomes quieter, steadier, less desperate. You stop clinging to high moments because you are no longer afraid of low ones. Emotional balance replaces emotional dependence. This steadiness is often mistaken for emotional coldness by those who still live in reaction. But inside, it feels like relief, like finally having room to breathe. The Stoics did not aim to eliminate emotion. They aimed to eliminate confusion. They wanted a mind clear enough to meet reality as it is, not as fear distorts it. As this clarity deepens, you may notice fewer emotional swings, less inner noise, more grounded presence, not because you care less, but because you are no longer fighting yourself. This is the quiet strength that allows suffering to dissolve without dulling the heart. As emotional clarity begins to settle, another layer quietly reveals itself. Without the noise of constant reaction, without the hunger for validation, without the fog of confusion, something familiar starts to feel unfamiliar. You notice patterns in how you think, in how you react, in how you describe yourself. And a subtle question rises, not with panic, but with honesty. How much of who I am was shaped by what hurt me? There is a strange comfort in familiarity, even when that familiarity was born from pain. Long after the wound has closed, the mind often keeps touching the scar, not to heal it, but to remember who it became because of it. Pain doesn't just leave memories, it leaves identities. Most people don't realize this is happening. They believe they are simply being themselves. But beneath that sense of, this is just who I am, there are old adaptations quietly running the show. The guardedness that once kept you safe, the anger that once gave you strength, the withdrawal that once prevented disappointment. These responses were intelligent at the time. They helped you survive. But survival strategies, when left unquestioned, slowly harden into personality traits. Stoicism asks a difficult but freeing question. Is this who you are, or who you became, to endure what you went through? Pain shapes behavior first. Identity comes later. A child learns that being quiet avoids conflict. An adult later calls themselves introverted. Someone learns that staying alert prevents harm. Years later, they call themselves anxious. Another learns that control prevents chaos. They grow up believing they are simply strong-willed. The mind turns coping into character. This is not a flaw. It is a function. The mind is efficient. It keeps what worked. But efficiency without awareness becomes limitation. Stoicism does not ask you to erase your past. It asks you to stop mistaking its echoes for your essence. One of the deepest illusions pain creates is the belief that your wounds define your depth, that without them you would be empty, that letting go of pain means losing meaning. So you hold on, not consciously, but subtly. You repeat stories, you reinforce traits, you protect old identities because they feel real. But pain is not identity, it is experience. And experience is something you had, not something you are. The Stoics taught that the self is not the narrative you repeat, but the awareness that observes it. When you begin to see this, the grip of old identities loosens. You realize you are not your defensiveness, not your mistrust, not your self-doubt. Those were learned responses, not permanent truths. Releasing an identity built from pain does not mean becoming unrecognizable. It means becoming unburdened. This release can feel disorienting at first. If you are no longer the strong one, the wounded one, the one who struggles, then who are you? The mind resists this question because it prefers known suffering to unknown freedom. Pain feels safer when it is familiar. Stoicism meets this resistance with steadiness. It does not rush the process. It does not force reinvention. It invites inquiry. Why do you react the way you do? Why do certain situations feel personal when they are not? Why does the mind return to the same emotional positions again and again? Not to judge, but to understand. The Stoics believe that identity should be rooted in values, not wounds, in chosen principles, not inherited reactions. When identity is built on pain, life becomes a constant reenactment. When identity is built on values, life becomes intentional. This shift requires courage. Letting go of pain-based identity can feel like betraying your past, as if honoring the wound requires carrying it forever. But honoring the past does not mean living inside it. You can acknowledge what shaped you without letting it dictate you. Many people fear that releasing pain will invalidate what they went through, that if they stop identifying with it, it means it wasn't that bad. This fear keeps wounds alive long after they have served their purpose. Stoicism offers a different truth. Healing does not erase significance, it completes it. Pain teaches. Then it is meant to be set down. When you stop feeding old identities, space opens, and in that space, something quieter emerges. Not a new persona, but a clearer presence. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of repeat. You feel without rehearsing the past. This clarity reveals how often pain-based identity narrows life. You avoid opportunities because that's not who I am. You tolerate patterns because this is just how I've always been. You defend traits that no longer serve you because they once kept you safe. Stoicism gently dismantles these walls by reminding you that character is not fixed. It is practiced. You are not trapped inside the version of yourself that learned to endure. You are free to evolve. This does not happen by rejecting the past. It happens by integrating it. You thank the old strategies for what they did. Then you release them. This release often brings grief, not for what happened, but for how long you carried it, for how much of life was shaped around protection instead of presence. Stoicism does not bypass this grief. It allows it to pass through without becoming another identity. You are not your pain story. You are the awareness capable of outgrowing it. As this truth settles, the mind becomes lighter, less reactive, less defensive. You stop introducing yourself to the world through your wounds. You stop filtering the present through old harm. And with that, the future begins to look different, not because it changed, but because you are no longer dragging yesterday into it. As the old identities loosen and no longer anchor you to past pain, the mind often looks for something else to hold on to. It rarely stays empty for long. When it releases yesterday, it tends to rush toward tomorrow. And quietly, almost automatically, it begins constructing versions of you that do not yet exist. Versions that promise relief. Versions that promise worth. Versions that promise that everything will finally feel settled later. This is where a different kind of weight appears. Not the heaviness of memory, but the tension of anticipation. Not what happened, but what should happen. And without noticing it, much of your emotional energy starts living in a future that has never arrived. There is a subtle sadness in constantly preparing to become someone else. It sounds hopeful on the surface. It even feels productive. But beneath it lives a quiet anxiety. The sense that your present self is not enough yet, that peace is postponed, that fulfillment is conditional. Most people don't see this as suffering. They see it as motivation. But Stoicism sees it clearly. Imagined futures are one of the mind's most convincing illusions. The future self becomes a container for everything unresolved. Happiness is placed there. Confidence is placed there. Freedom is placed there. You tell yourself that once certain conditions are met, you will finally exhale. When you reach a certain point, when you heal more, when you understand more, when life aligns. But this version of you keeps moving forward in time, always just out of reach. The Stoics warned against this habit because it pulls the mind away from the only place life can be lived. The present moment is the only ground where action, clarity, and peace can exist. Every future self imagined lives only as thought, and thought, no matter how convincing, is not reality. Anxiety grows here, not from danger, but from expectation. The mind rehearses outcomes, prepares for roles, and anticipates identities that feel necessary for safety or worth. And each rehearsal quietly tells the nervous system that now is incomplete. You begin to live in waiting mode. Stoic realism breaks this spell by refusing to negotiate with imagined outcomes. It does not deny the future. It simply refuses to live inside projections. It brings attention back to what is actually happening, not what might. The Stoics understood that the future is not just uncertain, it is uncontrollable. And tying emotional stability to something uncontrollable guarantees unease. You can prepare wisely without mentally relocating your life. Future selves often form around unresolved beliefs. The belief that you must become stronger before you can rest. The belief that you must become healed before you can be present. The belief that you must become successful before you can feel secure. These beliefs sound reasonable, but they quietly postpone peace. Peace becomes a reward instead of a foundation. This postponement creates pressure. Every moment becomes evaluated based on whether it moves you closer to that imagined version. If it doesn't, it feels wasted. Rest feels guilty. Stillness feels dangerous. You become tense not because something is wrong, but because something is supposed to happen. Stoicism gently removes this pressure by dissolving the authority of future selves. It asks, what if peace is not found by becoming someone else, but by fully inhabiting who you already are? This does not mean abandoning goals. It means separating action from identity. You can work toward change without mentally abandoning the present. You can plan without living inside the plan. The mind resists this at first. It believes that if it stops projecting forward, it will lose direction. But direction does not come from anxiety. It comes from clarity. And clarity only exists now. One of the most exhausting habits of the mind is constant rehearsal. You rehearse conversations that may never happen. You rehearse success to feel worthy. You rehearse failure to feel prepared. Each rehearsal pulls emotional energy into a scenario that does not exist. Stoic realism cuts through this by asking a simple question. Is this happening now? If not, it does not deserve emotional payment. This question is not dismissive. It is grounding. It returns your nervous system to reality. It allows the body to relax because it is no longer responding to mental images as if they were threats or promises. Many imagined futures are built to escape discomfort. The mind creates a version of you who no longer feels pain, uncertainty, or fear. But by doing so, It subtly rejects the present experience. This rejection is felt as restlessness. Stoicism does not promise a future without discomfort. It promises the ability to meet discomfort without being destabilized. This is a more reliable peace. When you stop investing emotionally in future versions of yourself, something important happens. You reclaim energy. You stop leaking attention into endless what-ifs. You stop measuring your worth against potential. You become available to life as it is unfolding. This availability changes how time feels. Moments slow down. Days feel fuller. You are no longer rushing toward yourself. There is also grief here. Letting go of future selves means mourning who you thought you would be, the life you imagined, the version of you that was supposed to arrive and fix everything. This grief is quiet, but real. Stoicism does not rush past it. It allows it to be felt without dramatizing it. That imagined future self was a coping mechanism, a way to keep going when the present felt heavy. You thank it, and then you release it. The Stoics believe that peace comes from aligning desire with reality. When desire is placed in the future, reality always disappoints. When desire is placed in what can be done now, peace becomes possible. This alignment does not shrink ambition, it grounds it. You act because action is appropriate, not because you are chasing a version of yourself. You become less anxious because you are no longer split between now and later. Less disappointed because you are no longer waiting for life to begin. Stoic realism reminds you that the future will arrive on its own, one present moment at a time. You do not need to mentally visit it to prepare. When this understanding settles, the body softens, the mind quiets. You stop bracing for a life that has not happened. You begin living the one that is happening. As the future stops pulling you forward like a rope around your chest, a new kind of quiet appears. The mind has fewer places to run. It can't escape into rehearsals as easily. It can't hide behind plans or one-day promises. And in that quiet, something surprising often shows itself, not as a dramatic confession, but as a simple discomfort. Because when the mind can't cling to tomorrow, it sometimes clings to something else. It clings to pain. Not because you enjoy suffering, not because you want your life to stay heavy, but because suffering can become familiar. And familiar to the nervous system can feel safer than unknown peace. This is one of the most uncomfortable truths to face, and also one of the most freeing. There is a quiet moment many people recognize, usually late at night or early in the morning, when everything is calm. No messages, no problems demanding immediate attention, and instead of feeling relief, they feel uneasy. Rest feels strange. Calm feels empty. Silence feels too open. And almost automatically, the mind starts searching for something to worry about, something to replay, something to regret, something to fix. It's like the mind is saying, "This is too quiet. Something must be wrong." That is not weakness. That is conditioning. Suffering can become a routine. The brain is built to notice threats, problems, and unfinished things. It keeps you alive by scanning for danger. But when life is not dangerous, the scanning can continue anyway. The mind can start producing pain just to stay busy. It's not trying to hurt you. It's trying to feel prepared. It confuses tension with control. This is how attachment to suffering begins. Not as a choice, but as a habit. Pain can also feel like identity. If you have been struggling for a long time, struggle becomes normal. You start introducing yourself to yourself through what you carry. I'm the one who has been through a lot. I'm the one who always has to be strong. I'm the one who can't catch a break. These thoughts may sound like honesty, but they can become a cage. And the cage stays in place because it feels like proof that your life has been real. Some people fear that if they release suffering, they will lose depth. They will become shallow. They will become naive. They will become one of those people who don't understand how hard life can be. So they keep suffering close, like a badge, like a shield. Not proudly, but subconsciously. It becomes a way to feel protected from disappointment, because if you always expect pain, you can't be surprised by it. This is where suffering becomes familiar comfort. A harsh comfort, but a comfort. Another hidden attachment is emotional validation. Pain often brings attention. When you are struggling, people check in, people soften, people care. This can create a silent link in the mind. Suffering equals connection. Even if you never say it out loud, the nervous system can learn it. Then, when life gets calm, you unconsciously fear losing that connection. You fear being alone with your peace. So the mind keeps a problem alive, just to keep the feeling of being held. Sometimes suffering also becomes a substitute for purpose. When you don't know what to do with your life, pain gives you something to focus on. It gives you a mission: survive, cope, endure, manage. It fills your days, and when the pain begins to fade, there is a frightening question waiting underneath. If I'm not struggling, what am I doing? This is why healing can feel unsettling. Not because healing is bad, but because it removes a familiar structure. Suffering can organize a life. It can become a schedule, a constant inner project. Without it, you may feel a kind of emptiness, not the empty of hopelessness, but the empty of openness. The empty that asks you to choose. The Stoics understood this trap. They knew the mind can become addicted to disturbance. They saw how people cling to anger, worry, and resentment because those emotions provide a sense of meaning and control. But Stoicism does not shame you for this. It simply exposes it, and once exposed, it begins to lose its power. The Stoic move is to separate pain from the story that keeps it alive. Pain is often real. You were hurt. You lost something. You were disappointed. You were betrayed. You carried burdens too early. Stoicism never denies that. What Stoicism challenges is the extra suffering created by mental attachment, the repeated rehearsals, the emotional gripping, the need to keep the wound active so the mind doesn't feel unprepared. The Stoics would say, events happen, but you decide what you keep carrying. Not instantly, not perfectly, but gradually, through practice. One way the mind clings to pain is through repetition. Replaying a conversation is a form of attachment. Revisiting the same disappointment is a form of attachment. Retelling the same story, even silently, is a form of attachment. Each replay feels like processing, but sometimes it is simply reinforcing. The mind says it's looking for closure, but it often just wants familiarity. This is why some people feel anxious when life improves. The mind doesn't trust improvement. It waits for the catch. It searches for what will go wrong. It keeps a small fire burning so it won't be shocked by the cold. Stoic practice breaks this addiction by training you to notice the first moment the mind reaches for pain. Not the pain itself, but the reach, the grasp, the return. That moment is where freedom lives. At first, you may not notice it until after the fact. You realize you've been spiraling for 20 minutes. That's still progress. Later, you catch it within a minute. Later, you catch it at the first thought. The moment you catch it, you have a choice. Do you continue feeding it, or do you return to what is real? Stoicism is deeply practical here. It teaches that many emotional storms are not storms. They are thoughts dressed like storms. The body responds as if something is happening, when in reality it is only an internal movie. So the Stoics trained themselves to ask, what is actually happening right now? Not what could happen, not what should have happened, not what might happen later, right now. This question is not a trick. It is a grounding tool. It pulls you out of mental suffering and back into reality. And reality, most of the time, is more gentle than the mind claims. Another Stoic tool is to see the mind's hunger for suffering as a craving, not a truth. When you feel the urge to revisit pain, label it quietly. This is the mind seeking familiarity. That label creates distance. It changes the relationship. The craving becomes something you observe, not something you obey. This is how addiction weakens, through awareness without judgment. The Stoics also understood that suffering often hides a desire underneath. Sometimes the desire is to be protected. Sometimes it is to be seen. Sometimes it is to avoid responsibility. Sometimes it is to avoid hope, because hope risks disappointment. When you identify the desire, the suffering becomes less mysterious. You stop treating it like fate. You treat it like a pattern. Then you can work with it. A powerful example is resentment. Resentment often feels like strength. It feels like justice. It feels like keeping your dignity. But resentment is usually attachment to an old injury. It keeps the wound warm. It gives the mind something to hold. And it can feel safer than forgiveness, because forgiveness sounds like vulnerability. Stoicism doesn't force forgiveness. It simply asks, is this resentment improving your life or consuming it? It reminds you that carrying bitterness punishes you more than it punishes the person who hurt you. Not morally, but practically. The emotional cost is paid by your body, your sleep, your attention, your ability to enjoy the present. When you see that cost clearly, the attachment begins to weaken, not because you became better, but because you became wiser. Another hidden attachment to suffering is the need to be right. Some people hold on to pain because it proves something. I was right to be cautious. I was right not to trust. I was right to expect disappointment. Letting go of suffering would mean admitting that the world might be safer than they believed, and that is terrifying. It would mean allowing openness. It would mean risking again. So suffering stays as proof. Stoic realism breaks this by reminding you that being right is not the goal. Being free is the goal. Being peaceful is the goal. Being present is the goal. And if suffering is your evidence, it is too expensive. The Stoics also spoke about the difference between what is up to you and what is not. This isn't just about control, it's about emotional investment. When you invest in what is not yours to command, you create constant friction. That friction becomes suffering. Over time, it becomes familiar. You forget it's optional. You think it's normal to live with a clenched mind. But it's not normal. It's common. The more you practice returning your energy to what is yours, your actions, your values, your choices, the less room suffering has to grow. The mind becomes simpler. It stops chasing fights it can't win. There is also a quiet pride some people feel in suffering, even if they would never admit it. Not pride like arrogance, but pride like meaning. Look how much I can endure. This is understandable. Endurance is respectable. But endurance becomes a trap when it replaces joy, when you feel suspicious of ease, when you feel guilty for being okay. Stoicism honors strength, but it does not worship suffering. The The Stoics did not seek pain for drama. They practiced hardship to prepare, yes, but they also valued peace as a form of inner order. They saw tranquility not as softness, but as mastery. So the question becomes, can you allow yourself to be okay without proving you've earned it through pain? This is where many people stumble. They believe happiness must be justified, that calm must be deserved, that if life is not heavy, they are missing something. This belief keeps suffering in place like a tax you keep paying even after the debt is cleared. Stoicism invites you to stop paying what is no longer required. Breaking attachment to suffering is not done by forcing positivity. It is done by learning to tolerate calm, by letting quiet moments exist without filling them with worry, by letting the body rest without searching for the next threat. At first, calm can feel unfamiliar, even unsafe. The body has been trained to live in alert mode. So when alertness drops, it feels like something is wrong. The Stoic response is gentle patience. This discomfort is just unfamiliar peace. Unfamiliar peace can feel like emptiness until you learn to live in it. This is why simple practices matter. When you notice yourself reaching for pain, return to the body. Feel your breathing. Feel the weight of your hands. Feel the contact of your body with the surface beneath you. Not as a ritual, but as a reminder. You are here, and here is safer than your thoughts. Stoic clarity also involves choosing what you consume mentally. The mind becomes what it eats. If you constantly feed it conflict, outrage, and fear, it will stay hungry for suffering. If you feed it steadiness, it becomes steadier. This is not about living in a bubble. It is about recognizing that attention is a resource. Where you place it shapes your inner life. Suffering thrives on scattered attention. Peace thrives on directed attention. Another key is learning to stop arguing with reality. Many forms of suffering continue because the mind keeps saying, "This shouldn't have happened." That sentence locks pain in place. It creates endless tension because the mind is fighting what cannot be undone. Stoicism does not ask you to like what happened. It asks you to stop demanding that the past be different. When the fight stops, pain can finally move. There is a difference between remembering and reliving. Remembering is natural. Reliving is attachment. Reliving keeps the nervous system trapped in old events. Stoic practice helps you step out of reliving by returning to facts, not interpretations. This happened. It was difficult. It is over. What is required of me now? That last part matters. It moves you from being a victim of memory to being an agent of the present. Agency is one of the most powerful dissolvers of suffering. As you loosen this attachment, you may notice a strange thing. Parts of you will resist. The mind may say, "If I let this go, something bad will happen." Or, "If I stop worrying, I'll be careless." Or, "If I stop feeling pain, I'll forget what I learned." These are protective thoughts. They are not true laws. They are old survival habits. You can keep the wisdom without keeping the wound open. The Stoics would tell you that the mind can learn without clinging. That growth does not require constant suffering. That lessons can remain even when pain leaves. A scar can exist without being touched every day. When this becomes clear, your relationship with yourself changes. You stop treating suffering like a companion. You stop using pain as proof of depth. You stop letting heaviness set the tone of your inner world. This does not make life perfect. It makes life lighter. As the grip of familiar suffering loosens, something tender rises to the surface. Without the constant weight of pain to occupy the mind, without old struggles to lean on, a quieter sadness begins to speak. It does not shout. It does not accuse. It simply asks to be seen. This is the grief that was postponed, the grief not of what happened, but of what never did. There is a particular kind of sorrow that comes from looking at your life and realizing it did not unfold the way you once believed it would. Not because you failed, not because you were careless, but because life moved in directions no one could fully predict. Paths closed, timelines shifted, versions of the future faded quietly, without ceremony. And for a long time, you may have told yourself it didn't matter, that you were fine, that others had it worse, that you should be grateful. But ungrieved hopes do not disappear. They wait. This grief often arrives later in life or in moments of stillness when there is finally enough space to feel it. It shows up as a vague heaviness, a sense of something unfinished, a quiet ache when you see others living parts of the life you once expected for yourself. It can be confusing because nothing is technically wrong in the present, and yet something feels lost. This is mourning the life you thought you'd have. Many people resist this grief because they believe acknowledging it means they are ungrateful, negative, or stuck in the past. Stoicism offers a gentler truth. Grief is not weakness, it is a form of honesty, and honesty is required for peace. The Stoics understood that attachment is not only to people or possessions, but also to expectations. When expectations dissolve, the mind often tries to move on quickly without allowing the heart to catch up. This creates a split. On the surface, you function. Inside, something remains unresolved. Unrealized paths carry emotional weight because they were real to you at the time. They held hope, meaning, direction. Letting go of them is not just letting go of plans, it is letting go of versions of yourself that were shaped around those plans. This is why the grief feels personal. You are not just mourning an outcome, you are mourning an identity that never fully lived. Stoicism does not dismiss this. It does not tell you to accept reality as a command. It teaches acceptance as a process, and part of that process is allowing grief to be felt without turning it into resentment. Bitterness often forms when grief is denied. When the mind says, "This shouldn't hurt," the pain does not disappear. It hardens. It turns into quiet anger at life, at others, at yourself. Stoic wisdom helps prevent this by allowing grief to remain clean, sad, but not poisoned. There is a difference between mourning and rumination. Mourning is feeling loss as it is. Rumination is replaying the story of how things should have gone. Mourning moves. Rumination traps. Stoicism encourages the former and gently interrupts the latter. One reason this grief lingers is because society rarely gives permission to grieve unrealized lives. There is no ritual for the career you didn't pursue, no ceremony for the relationship that never happened, no public space for the version of yourself that existed only in hope. So you carry this grief privately, unsure if it's even valid. It is valid. The Stoics would remind you that pain does not require witnesses to be real, and grief does not need justification to be honored. Another reason this grief is difficult is because it often comes mixed with self-blame. You wonder if different choices would have led somewhere better. You replay crossroads. You question timing. This mental loop can feel productive, but it is usually a disguised form of regret. And regret, when unchecked, becomes self-punishment. Stoicism draws a clear line here. It asks you to distinguish between responsibility and hindsight. You made choices with the knowledge, resources, and emotional capacity you had at the time. Judging those choices with information you gained later is not wisdom, it is cruelty. This perspective softens regret. It does not erase accountability. It removes unnecessary shame. Mourning unrealized paths also brings up comparison. You look at others and think, that could have been me. This comparison can quietly erode contentment. Stoicism counters this by reminding you that every life is shaped by invisible circumstances. You see outcomes, not costs. You see highlights, not compromises. Comparing paths without full context only deepens dissatisfaction. Stoic realism restores balance by grounding you in what is, not what appears. One of the most painful aspects of this grief is the sense of time. The feeling that it's too late, that certain doors have closed permanently, that opportunities have passed. Stoicism does not deny this reality. It acknowledges that time moves forward and not all paths remain open, but it also refuses to equate closed doors with a closed life. The Stoics believe that meaning is not dependent on a specific timeline. Purpose adapts. Fulfillment evolves. A life is not defined by one missed chapter. It is defined by how you meet the chapters that remain. This does not erase the sadness of what didn't happen. It contextualizes it. Grieving unrealized lives also involves releasing the fantasy that things would have been easier or happier. The mind often idealizes lost paths. It edits out difficulty and highlights possibility. Stoic clarity reminds you that no path is free from struggle. Different, yes, but not painless. This does not invalidate grief. It prevents romanticizing it. Romanticized grief keeps you stuck between worlds, resentful of the present and loyal to a future that never arrived. Another quiet layer of this grief is the loss of certainty. The life you imagined once gave direction. Without it, you may feel untethered. Stoicism responds by shifting focus from outcomes to virtues. You may not control where life leads, but you always control how you show up. Integrity, courage, patience, and presence are never outdated. When purpose is rooted in values instead of specific outcomes, it survives disappointment. Stoicism also teaches that mourning does not require judgment. You do not need to decide whether your grief is reasonable. You simply need to let it move. When grief is allowed to flow, it naturally transforms. When it is blocked, it stagnates. This means allowing yourself moments of sadness without turning them into stories about failure. It means letting tears exist without explaining them away. It means honoring the weight of what you carried without demanding that it define you. Over time, something shifts. The grief softens. Not because the loss wasn't real, but because it was finally acknowledged. You may notice gratitude emerging alongside grief. Not forced gratitude, but a quiet appreciation for what did unfold. This coexistence is a sign of integration, not contradiction. You can mourn what didn't happen and still value what did. Stoicism allows complexity. It does not ask you to choose between sorrow and acceptance. It teaches you to hold both without collapsing. As you release attachment to unrealized paths, your relationship with the present deepens. You stop waiting for a life that was supposed to be. You begin living the one that is. Not as a consolation prize, but as a legitimate expression of who you are now. This does not mean giving up on growth or change. It means changing from a place of clarity, not regret, from engagement, not resistance. Mourning completes something. It closes a loop. It frees energy that was tied up in what if. That energy becomes available for presence, creativity, and connection. Stoicism does not promise that grief will never return. It promises that grief does not have to turn into bitterness, that regret does not have to define you, that the past does not get to decide the tone of the rest of your life. As the grief of unrealized paths softens, something else becomes clearer. You begin to see how much energy was spent not only on what life didn't give you, but on what you hoped life would say about you. Not out loud, maybe not even consciously, but quietly, beneath choices, beneath effort, beneath the desire to make it worth something. When the heart mourns what didn't happen, the ego often tries to compensate by asking for a different kind of reassurance. At least let me be remembered well. This is a subtle pressure many people carry for years. It doesn't always look like vanity. Sometimes it looks like responsibility. Sometimes it looks like perfectionism. Sometimes it looks like fear of being misunderstood after you're gone. But underneath it is the same struggle, the desire to control the story other people tell about you. There is a certain pain in knowing that your life will be interpreted, that even your good intentions can be misunderstood, that your sacrifices may be forgotten, that your mistakes may be remembered more clearly than your effort. This pain is real, and it can quietly shape how you live. You start doing things not only because they are right, but because they will be seen as right. You start holding back truth because you want to protect your image. You start polishing your identity because you fear being reduced to one moment, one failure, one label. This is how legacy becomes a cage. Many people think legacy is about what happens after death, but the need to manage legacy often starts long before that. It starts when you feel watched, when you want to be respected, when you fear being misjudged, when you feel the urge to prove that your life matters. The mind begins to build a permanent record, and you begin to live like a person who is being reviewed. That is exhausting. Stoicism does not tell you to stop caring about your impact. It tells you to stop trying to control what you cannot control. And other people's memories, interpretations, and stories about you are not under your command. They never were. The Stoics had a clear principle. What belongs to you is your choice, your intention, your action. What does not belong to you is other people's opinions, including the opinions they carry into the future. When you try to manage what does not belong to you, you create tension that never resolves, because people will remember you differently, even people who love you. Two people can witness the same day of your life and carry two completely different versions of you. One will remember your kindness, another will remember your absence. One will remember your support, another will remember the time you didn't show up the way they needed. This is not always fair, but it is human. Memory is not a recording, it is a reconstruction. People remember through their emotions, they remember through their needs, they remember through their pain and their gratitude. They remember what confirms the story they already believe. This means that even if you lived perfectly, which no one does, you still would not control how you are remembered. The desire to control legacy often grows from fear. Fear that your life will be wasted. Fear that your struggles will be invisible. Fear that you will be forgotten. Fear that your name will mean nothing. These fears are understandable, but they become harmful when they control your behavior. You begin to live for applause that may never come. Stoicism offers a different kind of dignity. It teaches you to live so that your conscience is clear, Not so that your reputation is perfect. Reputation is fragile. Conscience is stable. Reputation depends on others. Conscience belongs to you. This shift changes everything. It turns life from performance into practice. One of the biggest traps of legacy thinking is that it pulls you away from the present. You start making choices based on how they will look later. You become cautious in ways that shrink you. You avoid vulnerability because it might damage your image. You avoid growth because growth requires mistakes, and mistakes are uncomfortable for the ego. The ego prefers a clean story over a real life. But a real life is messy. A real life includes change. It includes contradictions. It includes seasons that don't fit the highlight reel. When you accept this, you stop trying to edit yourself for future readers. Another legacy trap is bitterness. You feel you gave so much and you worry no one will recognize it. You fear being taken for granted. You fear being remembered as ordinary when you worked so hard to be meaningful. This creates a quiet resentment toward the world. You begin to think you are owed recognition. Stoicism dissolves this by returning you to intention. You do what is right because it is right, not because it will be rewarded. You give because it is aligned with your values, not because it guarantees appreciation. This does not make you a martyr. It makes you free. Freedom arrives when you stop demanding a receipt for your goodness. This does not mean you accept disrespect. Stoicism still honors boundaries. It simply removes the emotional dependency on being celebrated. You can pursue fairness without being controlled by the need to be validated. Legacy control also shows up in how people curate their identities. They try to appear consistent. They try to maintain a brand of who they are. They fear changing their mind because it might confuse others. They cling to roles, leader, helper, strong one, responsible one, because those roles are part of how they want to be remembered. But roles are not the self. They are functions, and functions change. Stoicism invites you to release the need to be seen a certain way, not by becoming careless, but by becoming honest. The most respected people are rarely the most controlled. They are the most grounded. They do not chase image. They hold a steady center. Another illusion is the belief that legacy will protect you from mortality. The mind thinks, if I'm remembered, I won't really be gone. This is a human longing, but it can keep you trapped. It makes you chase permanence in a world built on change. Stoicism is firm here. Everything changes. Everything passes. Even the greatest names fade with time. Even the most admired figures become footnotes for someone else's generation. This is not depressing in Stoicism. It is liberating. If all legacies fade, then you are released from the burden of trying to build an immortal image. You can live fully without trying to last forever. The Stoics did not see mortality as a threat. They saw it as a reminder to live with presence. The point is not to control how you're remembered. The point is to live well while you are here. Living well in Stoic terms means aligning with virtue, wisdom, courage, justice, and self-control. These are inner qualities that do not depend on applause. They do not need an audience. They are practiced in private. This is why Stoicism is so freeing. It moves your life from being judged externally to being governed internally. When you stop trying to control your legacy, you also stop trying to control how people interpret your actions. You let them interpret. You let them misunderstand. You let them simplify. You let them remember what they can remember. This does not make you careless. It makes you realistic. You realize that you are not responsible for other people's minds. This realization is deeply calming. It stops the mental rehearsals about how you will be perceived. It stops the anxiety about being misrepresented. It stops the urge to defend your name in every moment. You begin to move through life more lightly. But there is a deeper layer. The desire to manage legacy often hides a fear of being ordinary. Many people are secretly terrified of living a life that feels small. They want to be special. They want to be exceptional. They want their suffering to mean something big. They want their work to be recognized. Stoicism challenges the obsession with being special. Not because being special is wrong, but because chasing it often makes you miserable. When you chase exceptionalism, ordinary moments feel meaningless. You overlook what is real and valuable because it doesn't feel grand enough. Stoic wisdom restores reverence for the simple, for the daily practice, for small acts of integrity, for quiet kindness, for private courage. A life does not need to be famous to be honorable. It does not need to be remembered widely to be meaningful. Meaning is created in the act itself, not in the applause afterward. This shift also changes how you relate to mistakes. When legacy matters too much, mistakes feel catastrophic. You fear being remembered for the wrong thing. You fear your worst moment becoming your summary. This makes you rigid, defensive, afraid to be seen. Stoicism offers a calmer truth. You are not your worst moment. And even if someone chooses to remember you that way, it does not define your character. Character is built across time through consistent practice. Your conscience knows your effort, even if someone else doesn't. The mind may still crave recognition. That is human. Stoicism does not shame that craving. It simply teaches you not to obey it. The craving can exist without controlling you. This is emotional maturity. Feeling the desire, but choosing based on values. As you practice this, you begin to enjoy life more. You stop living as if every action is part of a permanent record. You become more playful, more sincere, less guarded. You speak more freely because you are not constantly calculating how you'll be remembered. This does not make you reckless. It makes you alive. There is also peace in accepting that people will remember parts of you that you never intended. They may remember your tone more than your words, your absence more than your gifts, your flaws more than your sacrifices. This can feel unfair, but it is not something you can fix by controlling. It is something you release by accepting human limitation. You allow others to be human, and you allow yourself to be human. Stoicism teaches that the only true legacy is the one you live inside. The state of your soul, your mind, your inner life. A calm mind is a legacy you experience every day. A clean conscience is a legacy that follows you everywhere. These are not dependent on anyone's memory. When you choose this, you are no longer trapped by ego. Ego wants a monument. Stoicism wants a peaceful mind. As the grip of reputation loosens and the need to be remembered a certain way fades, attention turns inward again. Not toward image, not toward legacy, but toward the quiet expectation you place on yourself. An expectation that rarely speaks kindly. A timeline that keeps ticking in the background, measuring your inner life against an invisible clock. This clock does not show dates. It shows judgments, and it whispers one sentence more often than any other. You should be over this by now. That sentence carries more weight than it seems. There is a particular kind of suffering that comes not from pain itself, but from arguing with pain's pace, from deciding that healing is late, from believing that something inside you is malfunctioning because it hasn't resolved on schedule. This belief quietly turns patience into pressure and recovery into a performance. Emotional timing is one of the mind's most subtle traps. It sounds reasonable, it sounds mature, it sounds like accountability, but beneath it is impatience with your own humanity. Most people are not taught how healing actually works. They are taught milestones, timelines, expectations. You'll feel better soon. Time heals everything. You've had long enough. These phrases mean well, but they plant a dangerous idea that healing is linear and predictable, that emotions follow rules, that there is a correct speed for recovery. When your inner experience doesn't match these expectations, something turns inward. You don't just feel pain, you feel failure. You don't just struggle, you judge yourself for struggling. Stoicism approaches this very differently. It does not measure healing by time, it measures it by relationship. How are you relating to what you feel right now? Are you fighting it or allowing it to move? Healing slows the moment you turn it into a deadline. When you tell yourself you should be healed by now, you create resistance. Resistance tightens the nervous system. It turns natural emotion into prolonged suffering. The body senses judgment and stays tense. The mind senses urgency and keeps scanning for progress. Ironically, the desire to be done becomes the reason you're not. This is not because you are weak. It is because the mind is trying to control something that does not obey force. Emotions have their own intelligence. They respond to safety, not pressure. They resolve when they feel allowed, not when they are chased out. Stoic wisdom teaches that nature has its own rhythm. You cannot command a wound to close faster by yelling at it. You cannot force a season to end by checking the calendar. Emotional healing follows the same principle. It unfolds according to readiness, not expectation. One of the reasons emotional timing becomes so painful is comparison. You look at others and assume they have moved on. You see people functioning, smiling, achieving, and you conclude that they are ahead. This comparison is unfair and inaccurate. You are seeing behavior, not inner reality. You are measuring your private experience against public appearances. Stoicism dissolves this comparison by reminding you that each mind carries a different history, different sensitivities, different capacities. There is no universal clock for the inner world. There is only responsiveness. Another reason timing becomes a source of suffering is identity. You start to think of yourself as someone who should be healed by now. This identity creates shame. And shame slows everything. Shame makes you hide emotions instead of processing them. It makes you tense instead of open. It makes you self-monitor instead of self-support. Healing requires softness. Softness cannot coexist with shame. Stoicism does not ask you to indulge emotion endlessly. It asks you to stop punishing yourself for having one. There is a difference. Letting go of emotional timing does not mean giving up on growth. It means removing the whip. You can still act wisely. You can still take steps forward, but you stop measuring your worth by speed. Another hidden cost of emotional timing is how it keeps you stuck in the past. When you keep asking, "Why am I not over this yet?" you are still defining yourself by the original wound. You are still orienting your life around it. The question itself keeps the pain central. Stoicism gently shifts the question. Instead of, "Why isn't this gone?" it asks, "What is required of me now?" This question moves you out of analysis and into presence. It doesn't deny the past. It stops living inside it. There is also fear underneath emotional timing. Fear that if healing takes too long, it will never happen. Fear that pain has become permanent. Fear that you are broken. These fears feed urgency. Urgency feeds tension. Tension feeds persistence of pain. Stoicism breaks this loop by removing the catastrophic story. Pain does not mean permanence. Delay does not mean defect. Healing is not a race with a finish line. It is a gradual reorganization of the nervous system. The body learns safety through repetition, not deadlines. Another layer is how emotional timing becomes moralized. You start to think that being healed is a sign of strength, and still hurting is a sign of weakness. This belief turns suffering into a character flaw. You stop being curious about your pain and start being ashamed of it. Stoicism rejects this moralization. It sees emotion as information, not failure. It sees pain as a response, not a verdict. You are not less virtuous because you are still healing. You are human. The Stoics often spoke about endurance, but not in the way it is commonly understood. Endurance was not about suppressing pain or rushing through it. It was about staying present without adding unnecessary resistance. Endurance was patience with reality. Patience does not mean passivity. It means allowing what is already happening to happen fully so it can complete its cycle. When you insist healing should have happened by now, you interrupt that cycle. You pull away from sensation. You brace. You tighten. The body reads this as threat and stays alert. The emotion stays active because it has not been acknowledged without judgment. Stoicism teaches a radical kindness here. It says, meet your inner state without the demand that it change. This meeting is not resignation. It is cooperation. Many people fear that if they stop pushing themselves to heal, they will stay stuck forever. This fear misunderstands how healing works. Pushing often keeps things frozen. Allowing often creates movement. Think of grief that finally moves once it is allowed to be sad without being rushed. Think of anger that softens once it is heard without being condemned. Think of anxiety that eases once it is met without panic. These shifts do not happen on command. They happen in safety. Emotional timing also steals the present. When you are constantly checking whether you are there yet, you miss what is already better. You overlook small shifts. You discount progress because it doesn't look dramatic enough. This reinforces discouragement. Stoicism trains attention differently. It brings focus back to what is within reach now. A calmer breath, a clearer thought, a kinder response. These are not milestones, but they are movement. Healing is often quiet. It does not announce itself. It shows up as fewer spirals, shorter recovery time, less self-attack, more space between thought and reaction. When you stop demanding speed, you begin to notice these signs. Another trap of emotional timing is how it narrows your life. You postpone joy until you're healed. You postpone connection until you're better. You postpone rest until you're done struggling. This turns healing into a prerequisite for living, instead of something that happens alongside living. Stoicism dissolves this postponement. It allows you to live now, even while healing continues. You are not required to be finished to participate in life. This is a profound release. When you stop insisting on a timeline, you stop seeing yourself as delayed. You see yourself as in process. Process is alive. Delay feels dead. Stoic realism reminds you that many things unfold invisibly. Roots grow underground before anything appears above the surface. Emotional healing often works the same way. Changes happen below awareness long before you feel different. Trusting this unseen work requires humility. It requires letting go of control. It requires faith, not in outcomes, but in the body's wisdom. Another subtle source of timing pressure is external expectations. Family, friends, society all carry ideas about how long something should take. When you internalize those ideas, your inner life becomes crowded with voices. Stoicism helps you reclaim authority over your own experience. It reminds you that only you can feel what you feel. Only you can know what you carry.
You do not owe anyone a timeline.
Letting go of emotional timing also changes how you relate to setbacks. When you believe healing should be finished, any bad day feels like failure. When you release the timeline, a bad day becomes information. It tells you what still needs care, not what is wrong with you. This reframing prevents discouragement from turning into despair. Over time, as the pressure eases, the body begins to trust again. Trust that it doesn't have to rush. Trust that it will be listened to. Trust that it can soften. When trust returns, healing accelerates naturally, not because you forced it, but because you stopped blocking it. Stoicism does not promise that pain will disappear quickly. It promises that pain does not have to be multiplied by impatience, that suffering does not have to be extended by self-judgment, that peace is possible even before everything resolves. This is a quiet freedom, not dramatic, not flashy, but deeply stabilizing. As the pressure of emotional timing softens, as the mind stops asking why healing hasn't finished yet, another presence becomes impossible to ignore. It has always been there, quietly shaping how every moment is experienced. It speaks quickly. It judges constantly. It explains everything, even when no explanation is needed. And the more silent life becomes, the louder this voice feels. This is the inner narrator, the one that never stops talking. Most suffering does not begin with events. It begins with the sentence that follows the event. A look becomes rejection. A delay becomes disrespect. A mistake becomes proof. A feeling becomes a problem. The inner narrator does not wait for clarity. It fills space instantly. It tells stories about what things mean, who you are, and what is about to happen next. These stories feel automatic, personal, and true. But Stoicism teaches something quietly radical. Thoughts are not facts, and narration is not reality. The Stoics understood that the mind's commentary is not neutral. It amplifies emotion. It stretches moments into meaning. It turns passing discomfort into identity. And most importantly, it speaks so constantly that people forget they can step back from it. This voice often sounds like you. It uses your language. It references your past. It claims authority, but it is not the self. It is a function of the mind, a habit of interpretation. When something happens, the senses register it first. Then the narrator steps in. It evaluates, predicts, judges, and reacts. This happens so fast that it feels like one seamless experience. But Stoic practice creates separation. It slows the moment just enough for awareness to enter. This separation is not suppression. It is clarity. The narrator's job is to make sense of the world, but it does not always do this accurately. It relies on shortcuts, assumptions, and emotional memory. It prefers certainty over truth. It fills gaps with familiar conclusions, and because it speaks in complete sentences, it feels convincing. This is how ordinary moments become emotional wounds. A comment becomes a verdict. A silence becomes abandonment. A a change becomes threat. The Stoics called these interpretations impressions. They taught that impressions arrive uninvited, but judgment is optional. The narrator offers interpretations automatically. You do not have to accept them. Most people don't know this. They live inside the narration as if it were reality itself. They react to stories instead of facts. They carry emotional pain created not by what happened, but by what the narrator said about what happened. This is not a flaw. It is conditioning. From early life, the narrator learned to protect you. It learned to anticipate danger. It learned to explain disappointment. It learned to keep you alert. Over time, it became overactive. It stopped waiting for evidence. It started narrating in advance. Stoicism does not attack this voice. It observes it. Observation changes the relationship. When you hear the narrator instead of being it, its power weakens. The voice continues, but it no longer controls the emotional response in the same way. This is the beginning of inner quiet. Not silence, but distance. Many people fear that if they detach from the inner narrator, they will become passive, empty, or lost. They believe the voice is what gives them identity. But identity is not commentary. Identity is presence. The Stoics believed the true self is the part of you that notices thought, not the thought itself. This noticing is calm, steady, and unreactive. It does not narrate. It witnesses. When you rest in this witnessing, emotions still arise. Thoughts still appear. But they do not hook you in the same way. You feel without spiraling. You experience without explaining. The inner narrator thrives on urgency. It rushes to interpret because it believes speed equals safety. Stoic detachment slows this process. It creates a pause between impression and belief. That pause is freedom. In that pause, you can ask a simple question. Is this a fact or a story? Often you realize it is a story, a familiar one you've heard before, one that always leads to the same emotional place. Seeing this pattern changes everything. For example, the narrator might say, "This always happens to me." That sentence carries a lifetime of weight. It turns one moment into a destiny. When you hear it as narration instead of truth, its grip loosens. You no longer have to obey it. Another common sentence is, "This means something is wrong with me." This thought turns experience into judgment. Stoicism interrupts this by separating event from evaluation. Something happened. That is all. Meaning is added later. The narrator also loves to predict. This will end badly. I know how this goes. There's no point trying. These predictions feel protective, but they create anxiety by pulling the mind into imagined outcomes. Stoic detachment brings attention back to what is actually happening, not what might. The Stoics trained themselves to stay with what is observable, sensation, action, choice. When the narrator moves beyond this, they step back. This stepping back does not require force. It requires familiarity. The more you notice the narrator's patterns, the less convincing they become. Another source of suffering is identification. The narrator does not just describe events, it describes you. I'm the kind of person who... This is just how I am. These statements solidify identity around past experiences. Stoicism dissolves this rigidity by reminding you that character is fluid. You are not your thoughts. You are not your tendencies. You are not your narration. You are the one who can choose how to respond. The narrator also narrates emotions themselves. I shouldn't feel this. This feeling is dangerous. This emotion means I'm weak. These judgments intensify the emotion. They turn feeling into struggle. Stoicism teaches you to feel without commentary, to let sensation exist without explanation. When emotion is felt directly, without narrative, it often passes more quickly. It does not need to be solved. It needs to be experienced. Another reason the narrator creates suffering is repetition. It repeats the same interpretations until they feel unquestionable. Stoic awareness breaks repetition by introducing curiosity. Is this the only way to see this? Is there another explanation? These questions are not meant to find answers. They are meant to loosen certainty. Certainty is the narrator's favorite tool. It speaks in absolutes. Always, never, everyone, no one. Stoicism responds with humility. It acknowledges that the mind does not know as much as it claims. This humility brings relief. When you stop believing every sentence the narrator produces, emotional wounds lose depth. They no longer define you. They no longer last as long. They become experiences, not stories. This does not mean the narrator disappears. It means it no longer runs the show. You still think, you still reflect, but reflection becomes intentional, not compulsive. You choose when to engage with thought. Stoic detachment also changes how you relate to memory. The narrator loves to revisit the past, adding commentary each time. Stoicism invites you to remember facts without reliving interpretations. The event happened. The feelings arose. The story is optional. This reduces rumination. It frees mental space. Another powerful shift happens in relationships. When the narrator quiets, you listen more. You react less. You stop assuming motives. You allow people to be human. This reduces conflict. Many arguments are not about events, but about narrations colliding. Stoicism restores simplicity. It removes layers of interpretation that complicate connection. As the narrator loses dominance, inner silence grows. Not emptiness, but openness. In this openness, you experience moments directly. A sound, a breath, a movement. These moments do not need commentary. They are complete as they are. This direct experience brings peace because it bypasses the mental machinery that creates suffering. The Stoics practiced this regularly. They trained attention to return to the present, not as an escape, but as a grounding. When the narrator pulled attention away, they gently returned. This practice builds strength. Over time, the narrator speaks less loudly. It interrupts less often. It still appears, but it no longer controls. You begin to trust yourself more, not because you have answers, but because you are not at the mercy of every thought. This trust is quiet. It does not announce itself. It feels like steadiness. As the inner narration begins to quiet, as thoughts lose their constant commentary, something else becomes noticeable. A reflex, a sudden pull toward action, a pressure to respond before the body has even settled. When the voice inside grows quieter, the urge to react often becomes louder, not because something is wrong, but because reaction has been filling the silence for years. There is a certain tension in the moment just after something happens. A message arrives, a tone changes, a memory surfaces, the body tightens, the mind rushes forward. And before awareness fully arrives, a response is already forming. Words, decisions, defenses. This speed feels natural, necessary, even responsible. But much of human suffering is born in this rush. The urge to react immediately is not wisdom, it is conditioning. Most people believe that reacting quickly means being honest, that pausing means suppression, that silence means weakness. But Stoicism teaches the opposite. True strength lives in the space between stimulus and response. That space is not emptiness, it is intelligence. The Stoics observed that the first impulse is rarely the clearest one. It is shaped by emotion, habit, and fear. The body reacts before the mind understands. This reaction is not wrong, but it is incomplete. Acting from it alone often leads to regret. Delayed response is not avoidance, it is alignment. The urge to react immediately often comes from the nervous system, not from reason. When something feels threatening, emotionally or psychologically, the body prepares to protect. Heart rate increases, muscles tighten, attention narrows. The mind interprets urgency as danger. It pushes for action because it believes action will restore safety. But emotional threats are rarely resolved through speed. They are resolved through clarity. Stoicism teaches you to recognize this moment. The tightening, the impulse, the push to say something now, do something now, decide now. Instead of obeying it, you acknowledge it. You let it exist without acting on it. This is where many people get confused. They think not reacting means suppressing emotion, but suppression means pushing feelings away. Stoic delay means allowing feelings to be present without letting them control behavior. You still feel anger, you still feel hurt, you still feel fear, but you do not hand them the steering wheel. The Stoics believed that emotions are signals, not commands. They provide information, not instructions. Acting on them immediately treats them as orders. Pausing treats them as messages. This pause can be short, sometimes just a breath, sometimes a few minutes, sometimes a night of sleep. The length matters less than the intention. The intention is to let the initial wave pass before choosing how to respond. When you react immediately, you often respond to your interpretation, not the event itself. You respond to the story, not the facts. This is how misunderstandings escalate. This is how small moments become conflicts. This is how regret is born. Stoic delay breaks this chain. Another reason the urge to react feels so strong is identity. You may believe that reacting quickly proves something about you, that you are assertive, that you are honest, that you do not tolerate disrespect, that you are strong. But reacting quickly often proves only that you are predictable. Stoicism values agency over reflex. It values choice over impulse. There is also fear underneath immediate reaction. Fear that if you don't respond right away, you will lose control of the situation. Fear that silence will be interpreted as weakness. Fear that your needs will be ignored. These fears are understandable, but they are not always accurate. Silence is not surrender. Silence is observation. When you delay response, you gather information. You allow your body to settle. You allow your perspective to widen. You move from a narrow emotional lens to a broader rational one. This does not erase feeling. It integrates it. The Stoics practiced this deliberately. They trained themselves to notice the first impression and withhold judgment. They knew that impressions arrive uninvited. What follows is optional. This practice is especially powerful in relationships. Many arguments are not about the issue itself, but about reactions layered on top of reactions. One person reacts quickly, the other reacts to that reaction. Soon, both are defending emotions rather than addressing reality. Delayed response interrupts this spiral. When you pause, you give the other person space to show more of themselves. Sometimes what seemed offensive was incomplete. Sometimes tone softens. Sometimes clarity arrives on its own. By reacting immediately, you close off these possibilities. This does not mean tolerating harm. Stoicism never asks you to accept abuse. It asks you to choose your response consciously, to respond from values, not from adrenaline. Another area where immediate reaction causes suffering is self-talk. A mistake happens, and the inner response is instant criticism, shame, harsh judgment. This inner reaction often hurts more than the mistake itself. Delaying self-judgment creates room for learning instead of punishment. Stoicism encourages compassion in this pause, not indulgence. Understanding. Delayed response also changes how you experience regret. When you react immediately, you often say or do things you later wish you hadn't. The regret that follows becomes another burden. When you pause, you reduce the number of regrets you carry. Life becomes lighter simply because there are fewer things to undo mentally. There is a misconception that fast responders are decisive and slow responders are unsure. In reality, true decisiveness often comes from waiting, from letting the situation show itself more clearly, from acting when clarity arrives instead of when pressure peaks.
The Stoics admired calm decisiveness, not haste.
This practice also builds self-trust. When you learn that you don't have to react immediately, you realize you can handle discomfort. You don't panic when emotions arise. You don't rush to escape them. You stay with yourself. This is emotional maturity. The urge to react immediately is also tied to control. Reaction gives the illusion of control. It feels like doing something. Pausing feels like letting go. Stoicism teaches that control is not about constant action. It is about choosing the right action. Sometimes the right action is silence. Sometimes it is waiting. Sometimes it is saying nothing at all. This can be uncomfortable, especially if you are used to managing situations through quick responses. The body may feel restless. The mind may produce urgency. This discomfort is temporary. It fades as you build tolerance. Delayed response is a skill. Like any skill, it strengthens with practice. Another important distinction Stoicism makes is between response and reaction. Reaction is automatic. Response is intentional. Reaction is driven by emotion. Response is informed by values. When you delay, you move from reaction to response. This shift changes how others experience you. You become steadier, less volatile, more grounded. People may feel calmer around you because you are not constantly mirroring emotional intensity. This does not make you distant. It makes you reliable. Delayed response also deepens empathy. When you pause, you can consider the other person's perspective, not to excuse harmful behavior, but to understand context. Understanding does not weaken boundaries, it clarifies them. Another subtle benefit is energy conservation. Reacting constantly is exhausting. It keeps the nervous system activated. Pausing conserves energy. It reduces emotional wear. Over time, this leads to greater resilience. The Stoics believe that unnecessary emotional expenditure weakens the soul. Conserving energy allows you to meet real challenges with strength. This practice also reshapes your relationship with time. You stop living in constant urgency. You stop treating every moment as an emergency. Life feels less frantic, more deliberate. As you become more comfortable with delay, you may notice fewer emotional spikes. Not because life is easier, but because you are no longer escalating every experience internally. Delayed response does not mean delayed living. It means living with awareness. There will still be moments when immediate action is required. Danger, clear injustice, urgent responsibility. Stoicism does not remove discernment, it sharpens it. You learn to distinguish between real urgency and emotional urgency. Most emotional urgency is not urgent. The mind often confuses discomfort with danger. Delaying response teaches the body that discomfort can be survived without immediate action. This retrains the nervous system. Over time, the urge to react weakens naturally. You become calmer, not by forcing calm, but by proving to yourself that you don't need to rush. This calmness has a ripple effect. Decisions improve, communication improves, self-respect improves. You feel less at the mercy of circumstances. You also begin to see how many conflicts never needed to happen, how many words never needed to be said, how many emotional storms passed on their own when you didn't feed them. Stoicism does not silence you. It gives your voice weight. When you do speak after pausing, your words are clearer, more precise, less charged. They come from intention rather than impulse. People listen differently. This is why delayed response is mastery, not suppression. Suppression hides emotion. Mastery integrates it. As reactions slow and responses become deliberate, a quieter pattern begins to show itself. It doesn't shout. It doesn't rush. It sits calmly in the background, often unnoticed, shaping how you see others and how you see yourself. It feels like clarity at first, like discernment, like having standards. But slowly, it tightens the chest and hardens the mind. This is moral superiority, the belief that you see more clearly, act more correctly, or live more consciously than others. It rarely announces itself as arrogance. It arrives disguised as righteousness. There is a particular comfort in feeling right, in knowing you would have handled things better, in noticing flaws in others that you believe you have outgrown. This comfort is subtle, but it carries a cost. The cost is peace, because judgment, even when silent, keeps the mind tense. It creates distance, it feeds comparison, and it quietly positions you above life instead of within it. Stoicism does not deny that wisdom exists or that some choices are more skillful than others. What it questions is the emotional need to feel superior. The Stoics understood that moral superiority is not strength, it is insecurity seeking elevation. Judgment often arises when you feel threatened, unseen, or unsure. It gives the ego a foothold. If you can't control the world, you can at least rank it. If you can't feel safe, you can at least feel right. This ranking may feel stabilizing, but it creates an inner division that never rests. The mind becomes busy sorting people into categories: more aware, less aware, stronger, weaker, better, worse. This sorting feels like clarity, but it is actually contraction. It narrows empathy. It reduces curiosity. It turns human complexity into verdicts. Stoicism chooses a different posture. Not moral blindness, but humility. Not judgment, but understanding. Humility, in Stoic terms, is not self-erasure. It is accurate self-placement. It is knowing that you too are unfinished, that your clarity came through struggle, that your current insight is not permanent, that under different circumstances you might act very differently. This humility dissolves the need to stand above others. You no longer need to prove your growth by pointing out someone else's lack of it. One of the reasons moral superiority is so tempting is that it feels like progress. You believe you have evolved, and in some ways you have, but growth does not require comparison. When growth turns into judgment, it becomes another attachment. Judgment creates a false sense of separation. You forget that everyone is acting from their current level of awareness, shaped by their experiences, fears, and conditioning. You forget that insight is not evenly distributed, and that it cannot be forced. Stoicism reminds you that people do not resist truth because they are bad. They resist because they are afraid, distracted, or unprepared. You were once there too. Another hidden cost of moral superiority is loneliness. Judgment isolates. Even when you are surrounded by people, the mind stays separate. You observe instead of connect. You evaluate instead of listen. You lose the warmth of shared humanity. Peace cannot grow in separation. Judgment also feeds impatience. You expect others to see what you see, act how you act, respond how you respond. When they don't, frustration grows. Stoicism dissolves this impatience by removing unrealistic expectations. People are where they are. That is not a flaw. It is a fact. When you accept this, tension releases. Moral superiority often shows up in subtle ways. A quiet eye roll, an internal sigh, a sense of, "I would never." These moments seem small, but they accumulate. They shape the tone of your inner life. Over time, they turn compassion into condescension. Stoic humility interrupts this pattern by returning attention inward, not to self-criticism, but to self-honesty. You remember your own blind spots, your own contradictions, your own moments of confusion. This remembrance softens judgment naturally. Another trap of righteousness is how it disguises ego. You believe you have moved beyond ego, yet the need to be right proves otherwise. Ego does not disappear when it becomes spiritual or philosophical. It simply changes language. Stoicism cuts through this by emphasizing practice over identity. You are not a Stoic because you judge less or know more. You practice Stoicism when you respond wisely, patiently, and humbly, especially when it is uncomfortable. Humility also protects you from rigidity. When you believe you are right, you stop learning. You close yourself off from new perspectives. Stoicism keeps the mind open by reminding you that certainty is fragile. Wisdom is flexible. This openness does not weaken conviction. It strengthens it. You hold your values without needing others to mirror them. Another reason moral superiority poisons peace is because it keeps conflict alive internally. Even if you never say a word, the mind replays disagreements. It revisits who was wrong. It reinforces stories of injustice. This keeps emotional energy trapped in the past. Stoicism releases this by focusing on what is within your control. You cannot correct everyone. You cannot awaken everyone. You cannot make the world align with your understanding. What you can do is act with integrity now. Integrity does not require applause. It does not require agreement. It does not require dominance. When you let go of superiority, you become more forgiving, not because others deserve it, but because you deserve peace. Forgiveness here is not approval. It is release. It is choosing not to carry unnecessary weight. This release also changes how you speak. Your words become less sharp, less performative, more grounded. You no longer speak to win. You speak to clarify, or sometimes not at all. Stoic humility values silence when speech would only reinforce ego. Another layer of superiority is self-judgment. You may feel superior to your past self, judging who you used to be. This internal hierarchy keeps shame alive. Stoicism replaces this with compassion for past ignorance. You did what you knew how to do at the time. Growth does not require contempt for who you were. Humility also deepens empathy. When you stop ranking, you start understanding. You see pain instead of failure, fear instead of ignorance, conditioning instead of malice. This does not excuse harm. It contextualizes it. Context reduces emotional charge. Stoicism teaches that everyone is trying to avoid suffering and seek peace, even when their methods are flawed. Remembering this human motive softens the heart. There is also freedom in letting go of being right. Rightness is heavy. It requires defense. It requires explanation. It requires constant vigilance. Humility is lighter. It allows you to be wrong without collapse, to change without shame. This flexibility brings calm. As moral superiority fades, relationships improve. Not because others change, but because you meet them without an agenda. You stop trying to correct. You start trying to understand. Even disagreement feels less threatening. Stoic humility also protects against bitterness. Bitterness often grows from feeling morally elevated but powerless. You see problems everywhere but feel unable to fix them. Letting go of superiority returns focus to what you can influence, your actions. Action rooted in humility is effective. It does not provoke resistance. It invites trust. Another benefit is inner consistency. When you drop superiority, you stop holding yourself to impossible standards. You allow mistakes. You allow learning. This reduces internal conflict. Peace grows when inner and outer expectations align. Stoicism does not make you passive. It makes you precise. You choose battles wisely. You speak when it matters. You let go when it doesn't. Letting go of moral superiority does not mean abandoning values. It means living them quietly. As humility settles in and the need to be right loosens its grip, something subtle but powerful becomes possible. Without judgment holding everything in place, without ego defending familiar ground, the mind begins to notice what no longer fits. Old reactions feel heavy. Old beliefs feel tight. Old roles feel like clothes that once protected you but now restrict your movement. And a quiet realization emerges. Some parts of you are already gone. You just haven't let them die yet. There is a difference between change that happens to you and change you choose. Most people experience the first. Life breaks habits. Circumstances force endings. Time erodes identities. But Stoicism introduces a rarer practice, voluntary inner death. The conscious decision to let outdated versions of yourself end before life does it for you. This kind of death is not dramatic. There are no announcements, no ceremonies, no external signs. It happens internally, often in silence. A belief is released. A reaction is no longer fed. A story stops being repeated. Something that once felt essential is gently laid down. The Stoics understood that suffering often continues not because pain is present, but because old selves are still being protected. You keep defending habits that no longer serve you. You keep justifying reactions that were once useful but are now harmful. You keep carrying identities that helped you survive earlier seasons but now limit growth. This is not weakness. It is loyalty to what once worked. At some point in life, survival strategies become obstacles. The guardedness that once kept you safe now keeps you isolated. The control that once gave stability now creates tension. The identity built around struggle now resists peace. Stoic wisdom asks you to recognize when protection has turned into prison. The idea of inner death can feel unsettling because identity feels permanent. You think of yourself as a continuous story. But Stoicism teaches that the self is not a fixed object. It is a process, and processes can be updated. Old versions of you were not wrong. They were appropriate responses to earlier conditions. But conditions change, and clinging to outdated responses creates friction. Voluntary inner death is the willingness to say, "This no longer serves me," without resentment, without drama, without denial of what it once gave. This is difficult because the mind often confuses identity with safety. Letting go of who you were can feel like stepping into uncertainty. You may wonder who you'll be without that familiar role. The strong one, the wounded one, the responsible one, the one who never rests, the one who always reacts. These identities feel solid because they've been rehearsed. Stoicism meets this fear with steadiness. It reminds you that you are not erasing yourself. You are refining yourself. One of the most powerful Stoic practices is to view identity as something you practice, not something you possess. You are not an anxious person. You practice anxious responses. You are not a bitter person. You practice bitter thoughts. When practice changes, identity follows. This understanding makes inner death possible. You don't have to kill a self. You stop feeding a pattern. Old beliefs are often the first to go. Beliefs about what you deserve. Beliefs about how the world works. Beliefs about what is possible for you. Many of these beliefs were formed in moments of pain or limitation. They once made sense. They protected you from disappointment. But protection has a cost. It narrows life. Stoic inner death involves questioning beliefs without attacking them. You ask, is this belief still true? Not historically true, but presently useful. Does this belief expand my capacity to live well, or does it shrink it? When a belief shrinks you, it is ready to be released. Habits follow beliefs. You react automatically because you believe danger is near. You avoid rest because you believe productivity equals worth. You stay tense because you believe relaxation invites loss. These habits are not random. They are expressions of old inner agreements. Voluntary inner death means breaking these agreements gently. You don't force new habits. You remove the old justification. When the belief dissolves, the habit weakens naturally. Attachment is often the hardest part to release. Attachment to pain, attachment to control, attachment to being needed, attachment to being seen a certain way. These attachments give structure to the self. Without them, there can be a sense of emptiness. Stoicism does not rush to fill that emptiness. It allows it. That emptiness is not absence. It is space. Space is where new clarity forms. Many people avoid inner death because they fear losing meaning. If you let go of old attachments, what gives life weight? Stoicism answers simply, virtue, character, presence, the quality of how you live, not the identity you cling to. Meaning rooted in identity is fragile. Meaning rooted in values is stable. Inner death also involves letting go of narratives. Stories you tell about why you are the way you are. Stories about what you can't change. Stories about who hurt you and how that defines you. These stories once helped you make sense of chaos. Over time, they can become cages. Stoicism invites you to stop telling these stories, not because they are false, but because they are complete. The lesson has been learned. The story no longer needs repetition. This is where many people struggle. Releasing a story can feel like invalidating the pain that created it. Stoicism makes an important distinction. You can honor pain without keeping it alive. You can respect what shaped you without letting it rule you.
Inner death is not betrayal of the past. It is gratitude followed by release.
There is also fear of inconsistency. You may worry that changing yourself means being fake or unreliable. Stoicism reframes consistency. True consistency is not repeating the same behavior. It is living according to the same values in changing conditions. A Stoic is not consistent in habit, but in principle. Voluntary inner death also requires patience. You cannot force old selves to disappear overnight. They return out of habit. They whisper familiar thoughts. They pull you back into old reactions. This does not mean failure. It means conditioning. Each time you choose not to engage an old pattern, you weaken it. Each time you act from clarity instead of reflex, you strengthen the new way. This is not a dramatic transformation. It is a quiet shift repeated many times. One of the deepest forms of inner death is letting go of who you thought you had to be. The version of yourself built to meet expectations, to avoid rejection, to secure approval. This version often feels responsible, but it carries constant tension. Stoicism releases this by grounding worth internally. You no longer need to perform identity. You simply act with integrity. Another inner death involves letting go of control over outcomes. The self that believed it could manage life through effort and vigilance eventually exhausts itself. Stoicism allows that self to rest. You still act, you still plan, but you stop believing that control equals safety. This release brings relief. Inner death also touches ambition. Not the desire to grow, but the attachment to proving yourself. When ambition is fueled by insecurity, it becomes endless. There is always another version to become, another standard to meet. Stoicism ends this cycle by removing the need to arrive. You are allowed to be in process without being unfinished. There is grief in inner death, not grief for events, but for selves that carried you, selves that endured, selves that worked hard to protect you. Stoicism allows this grief without turning it into nostalgia. You thank those selves, and you let them rest. This practice also reduces fear of external death. When you become familiar with letting parts of yourself end, the idea of impermanence becomes less threatening. You learn that endings are not annihilation. They are transitions. The Stoics practiced this regularly. They rehearsed loss not to become cold, but to become free. When you are no longer clinging to fixed identity, life feels lighter. Change feels less dangerous. Voluntary inner death also sharpens discernment. You become quicker to notice when you are acting from an old place. You feel the misalignment. You adjust. This creates inner coherence. As outdated versions fall away, something simpler emerges. Not a new persona, but a steadier presence. Less defensive, less reactive, more responsive, more at ease with uncertainty. This presence does not need to announce itself. It does not need to prove growth. It simply lives. Stoicism teaches that the goal is not to become someone else, but to remove what blocks your natural clarity. Inner death clears the path. As old versions of the self are allowed to rest, as identities loosen and inner resistance softens, something profound becomes possible. You stop fighting who you were. You stop arguing with what happened. And in that stillness, life presents its final invitation to stop resisting reality itself, not passively, not bitterly, but fully. This is where resentment either dissolves or hardens forever. There is a quiet tension many people live with that has nothing to do with the present moment. It is the tension of disagreement with life. A subtle but constant sense that things should have gone differently, that certain events should not have happened, that fate made a mistake. This disagreement does not always feel angry. Sometimes it feels like sadness, sometimes like exhaustion, sometimes like a quiet numbness. But underneath it is the same resistance. Resentment is not always loud. Often, it is silent endurance mixed with disbelief. Stoicism addresses this not by asking you to like what happened, but by asking you to stop fighting what cannot be undone. This is where amor fati enters, not as a slogan, but as a practice. Love of fate does not mean celebration of pain. It means acceptance so complete that resentment has no place to attach. Resentment survives on one belief: this should not have happened to me. As long as that belief remains, emotional release is impossible. The mind stays locked in opposition to reality. It keeps reliving the moment of rupture. It keeps asking life to apologize. It keeps waiting for meaning to be delivered as compensation. Stoicism breaks this cycle by changing the relationship to fate entirely. The Stoics understood that fate is not personal. Life does not target, it unfolds. Events are not moral judgments, they are conditions. When you take fate personally, you add a layer of suffering that never resolves. Radical acceptance does not mean resignation, it means alignment. It means removing the internal war. When something happens, there are two responses available. You can meet it with resistance, or you can meet it with acceptance. Resistance asks, "Why me?" Acceptance asks, "What now?" One traps you in the past, the other brings you into the present. Resentment lives in the space between what happened and what you wish had happened. Acceptance collapses that space. This does not happen intellectually. You cannot think your way into acceptance. It happens emotionally, gradually, through repetition. Each time the mind reaches back to argue with reality, you gently return it to what is.
This is not giving up. It is conserving energy.
Many people fear acceptance because they believe it means approving injustice or excusing harm. Stoicism makes a crucial distinction. You can accept that something happened without approving of it. Acceptance acknowledges reality. Approval assigns value. They are not the same. You can accept loss without liking it. You can accept betrayal without excusing it. You can accept pain without glorifying it. What acceptance removes is the ongoing demand that the past be different. Amor fati goes one step further. It does not stop at acceptance. It invites love, not emotional affection, but existential consent. The willingness to see even difficult events as part of the fabric that shaped your capacity to live wisely now. This is not romanticizing suffering, it is integrating it. The Stoics believe that everything that happens can be used. Not everything is good, but everything can contribute. When you resist fate, you waste what happened. When you accept it, you transform it. Transformation does not require understanding why something happened. It requires choosing how it will shape you. Resentment often persists because pain feels meaningless. You ask, "What was this for?" And when no answer arrives, bitterness grows. Stoicism removes the need for cosmic explanation. Meaning is not discovered. It is created through response. Your response is where fate becomes fuel instead of burden. Another reason resentment holds on is identity. You may have built part of yourself around being wronged, around having endured something unfair. Letting go of resentment can feel like letting go of proof. Proof that your pain mattered. Proof that you were justified. Stoicism offers a different validation. Your pain mattered because it was felt. It does not need resentment to certify it. Holding on to resentment does not honor pain. It prolongs it. Radical acceptance also frees you from comparison. When you resist fate, you compare your life to imagined alternatives. You think of who you would have been if things had gone differently. These comparisons intensify resentment. Stoicism dissolves them by grounding you in what actually exists.
You are not competing with hypothetical versions of yourself. You are living one life.
Amor fati removes the fantasy that another life would have been easier. Different, yes. Easier, not guaranteed. Every path contains difficulty. Fate simply chose this configuration. This realization softens envy and regret. Another hidden aspect of resentment is delayed grieving. When you resist fate, you delay mourning. You stay in protest instead of grief. Grief moves. Protest freezes. Acceptance allows grief to complete. This completion brings relief that resistance never does. Stoicism also recognizes that resentment often disguises fear. Fear that if you accept what happened, it will happen again. Fear that acceptance invites vulnerability. Fear that dropping resentment means lowering defenses. In reality, resentment is a poor defense. It keeps you tense, not protected. Acceptance allows you to respond clearly if something similar arises again. You become wiser, not weaker. Radical acceptance also changes your relationship with control. You stop expecting life to obey your preferences. You accept that control is limited. This acceptance does not paralyze you. It clarifies where action is possible and where it is not. When you stop fighting what you cannot change, you gain energy to change what you can. The Stoics practiced this daily. They reminded themselves that external events are neutral until judged. They trained themselves to say, "This is what has been given," not with despair, but with readiness. Readiness is the opposite of resentment. There is also relief in stopping the inner argument. Many people replay events for years, hoping to reach a different conclusion. Radical acceptance ends the debate, not by winning it, but by leaving it. You do not need to agree with fate. You need to stop arguing with it. This is where emotional release happens. The body relaxes because the threat is over. The mind quiets because the fight has ended. The nervous system resets because it no longer needs to stay alert. Peace arrives not because life became fair, but because you stopped demanding fairness from what has already passed. Amor fati also brings gratitude, not forced gratitude, but grounded appreciation. You begin to see how certain hardships refined you, how they revealed values, how they clarified priorities. This gratitude does not erase pain, it contextualizes it. Context transforms experience. Another powerful effect of radical acceptance is forgiveness, not always of others, but of life itself. You forgive reality for not matching expectation. This forgiveness frees emotional energy trapped in disappointment. Forgiveness here is not moral, it is practical. Stoicism also teaches that fate includes your response. You are not just a recipient of events, you are a participant in how they shape your character. Loving fate includes loving your capacity to respond with wisdom. This restores dignity. When you fully accept fate, resentment loses its function. It no longer protects, protests, or proves anything. It becomes unnecessary. You may still feel sadness. You may still feel anger at times. Acceptance does not eliminate emotion. It removes the layer of bitterness that keeps emotions stuck. This is emotional release, not catharsis, but resolution. As acceptance deepens, you stop carrying invisible weights. You stop waking up with tension whose source you can't name. You stop revisiting the same mental scenes. The past loosens its grip. You become more present, not because the past vanished, but because it no longer demands attention. Radical acceptance also prepares you for future uncertainty. When you no longer fear fate, change becomes less threatening. You trust yourself to meet what comes. This trust reduces anxiety. Stoicism does not promise a smooth life. It promises an unresistant mind. This is one of the deepest forms of freedom available. As acceptance settles in and resentment loosens its grip, another weight becomes noticeable. It doesn't feel sharp. It feels heavy. It feels old. It feels like something you've been carrying for so long that you stopped noticing it as a burden. This weight is the quiet ledger in your mind, the record of what was taken from you, what was unfair, what is still owed. Even when fate is accepted, this ledger can remain. And as long as it does, freedom stays partial. This is emotional debt. Emotional debt forms when pain is not fully released, but instead stored as a claim against someone, against life, against the past. It sounds like, they owe me an apology, they owe me understanding, they owe me the life I didn't get. The mind keeps track, believing that balance will one day be restored. But balance never comes this way. Keeping emotional score feels justified. After all, something was lost. Something was unfair. Something hurt. Emotional debt feels like proof that what happened mattered. Without it, there's a fear that the pain will be dismissed or forgotten. So the mind holds onto the account, convinced that letting go means letting the injustice win. Stoicism challenges this belief gently but firmly. It asks a difficult question. What has this debt actually given you? Emotional debt does not protect you. It does not restore what was lost. It does not force accountability. What it does is keep you tied to the moment of injury. It keeps the nervous system activated. It keeps the mind revisiting the past, waiting for payment that may never come. This is why emotional debt leads to emotional bankruptcy. All energy is spent maintaining the ledger. None is invested in the present. The Stoics understood that holding on to grievance is like drinking poison and waiting for someone else to feel the effects. The cost is paid daily, quietly, in tension, fatigue, bitterness, and reduced capacity for joy. This does not mean the pain was insignificant. It means the method of carrying it is unsustainable. Emotional debt often starts with a reasonable expectation. Someone should have known better. Someone should have treated you differently. Someone should have protected you. These expectations are human. The problem begins when expectation turns into entitlement. Not entitlement in the sense of arrogance, but in the sense of believing that emotional peace depends on repayment. Peace becomes conditional. Stoicism removes this condition. It does not deny that wrong was done. It denies that your healing depends on someone else's response. Another reason emotional debt persists is hope. Hope that one day the other person will understand. Hope that they will finally say the right words, hope that the truth will be acknowledged. This hope keeps the wound open. It keeps attention oriented outward. Stoicism does not ask you to abandon hope entirely. It asks you to relocate it. Instead of hoping for recognition, you hope for release. Instead of hoping for justice from others, you hope for clarity within yourself. This relocation changes everything. Emotional debt also feeds identity. You may see yourself as someone who was wronged, overlooked, or mistreated. This identity gives structure to your story. It explains your caution. It justifies your anger. It makes sense of your pain. Letting go of emotional debt can feel like losing this structure.
But identity built on injury is fragile. It keeps you defined by what happened, not by what you choose now.
Stoicism invites you to build identity around values instead of wounds, integrity instead of grievance, presence instead of protest. Another layer of emotional debt is comparison. You look at others who seem to have received what you didn't: support, love, opportunity, and the ledger grows. The mind says, "Life owes me this too." This comparison fuels resentment. Stoicism dissolves it by reminding you that fairness is not evenly distributed, not because life is cruel, but because life is complex. Accepting this does not make you passive, it makes you realistic. Emotional debt also shows up in relationships. You may keep score with partners, family, friends. Who did more? Who hurt who? Who owes effort? This scorekeeping creates tension even in moments of closeness. You are never fully present because part of you is calculating. Stoicism shows you that relationships thrive on generosity, not accounting. Generosity here does not mean self-sacrifice. It means choosing connection over control. When you stop keeping score, interactions become lighter, not because issues disappear, but because you are no longer trying to extract payment through emotion. Another reason emotional debt feels necessary is fear of repetition. You believe that if you let go, the same harm will happen again. The ledger feels like protection. Stoicism replaces this false protection with wisdom. You learn from what happened. You set boundaries. You adjust behavior. You do not need resentment to remember lessons. Memory does not require bitterness. Stoic practice emphasizes discernment over grievance. Discernment looks forward. Grievance looks backward. One protects, the other traps. Letting go of emotional debt also involves recognizing where responsibility truly lies. Some things were not your fault. Others were partly shaped by choices made under pressure or ignorance. Stoicism does not encourage self-blame, but it does encourage clarity. You separate what was done to you from how you responded. You take responsibility for the latter without punishing yourself for the former. This separation frees energy. Another hidden cost of emotional debt is how it limits trust. Even with new people, old accounts influence behavior. You hold back, you test, you wait for proof. Stoicism allows cautious openness. You stay aware without being closed. Letting go of debt does not mean becoming naive. It means not punishing the present for the past. There is also exhaustion in carrying emotional debt. The mind revisits old conversations, replays scenes, imagines confrontations that never happen. This mental activity drains life force. Stoicism ends this drain by closing accounts that will never be settled. Closure does not require agreement, it requires decision. You decide that your peace is worth more than repayment. This decision can feel unfair at first. It may feel like you are letting someone off the hook. Stoicism reframes this. You are not freeing them, you are freeing yourself. Justice is not always available externally. Peace is always available internally. Letting go of emotional debt also brings grief. Grief for the acknowledgement you never received, the apology that never came, the protection that never arrived. Stoicism allows this grief to be felt fully without turning it into bitterness. Once grief is completed, the debt dissolves naturally. Another subtle form of emotional debt is self-directed. You may feel you owe yourself a better past, a different outcome, a life that made more sense. This self-debt turns into regret and self-punishment. Stoicism dissolves this by reminding you that the past is not a contract you failed to fulfill. It is a sequence of events you navigated with the tools you had. You owe yourself compassion, not repayment. As emotional debt releases, you may notice a sense of lightness that feels unfamiliar. Without the ledger, the mind has more space. Silence becomes less tense. The body relaxes. You respond more freely. This lightness can feel disorienting. The mind may try to rebuild the account. This is normal. Each time it does, you gently return to the present. You remind yourself that the account is closed. Stoicism is not about forgetting. It is about no longer demanding interest on pain. When you stop keeping score, you stop living in scarcity. You stop feeling emotionally bankrupt. You stop waiting for payment. You invest energy in what grows now. This investment shows up as patience, as generosity, as steadiness, as the ability to enjoy moments without referencing old wounds. Letting go of emotional debt does not erase injustice. It removes its ongoing cost. As the emotional ledger finally closes and the weight of unpaid accounts lifts, another expectation quietly steps forward. It does not feel heavy at first. It feels reasonable, almost necessary. A belief that says peace will arrive once everything makes sense, once the story is explained, once the right words are spoken, once the ending is clear. This belief keeps many people waiting long after the pain itself could have softened. This is the need for closure. There is a unique kind of restlessness that comes from unfinished stories, conversations that ended abruptly, relationships that faded without explanation, events that changed everything but never came with answers. The mind returns to these moments not because it enjoys pain, but because it believes resolution is missing. It believes that without closure, peace is impossible. Stoicism gently disagrees. The Stoics understood that life rarely provides clean endings. People leave without explaining. Situations change without warning. Truth is partial. Motives remain unclear. Waiting for closure in a world like this means waiting forever. And while you wait, life keeps moving. The need for closure is often a disguised form of control. The mind wants to tie events into a complete story so it can feel safe again. It wants certainty. It wants to know why something happened so it can prevent it from happening again. This desire is understandable, but when closure depends on other people's insight, honesty, or willingness, peace becomes hostage to conditions you cannot command. Stoicism restores peace by removing this dependency. Closure feels necessary because the mind dislikes ambiguity. Ambiguity feels like danger. When something is unresolved, the mind keeps it active, scanning for missing information. This creates mental loops, replays, imagined conversations, alternate endings. All of this feels like processing, but often it is just waiting. Waiting drains energy. Stoic wisdom teaches that understanding is not required for acceptance. You do not need to know why something happened to stop suffering from it. You need to decide how much space it occupies now. This is a radical shift. It moves power back to you. Many people confuse closure with healing. They believe that once they get answers, healing will follow. But often, even when explanations arrive, relief is brief. New questions appear. Doubts surface. The mind keeps searching. Closure promised peace, but delivered more thinking. Stoicism recognizes that peace does not come from answers. It comes from alignment with reality. Another reason the need for closure persists is hope. Hope that the other person will finally understand. Hope that they will apologize. Hope that the truth will be acknowledged. This hope keeps the door open emotionally. It prevents final release. Stoicism does not condemn this hope. It simply asks whether it serves you. If hope keeps you stuck in waiting, it becomes another form of attachment. Releasing the need for closure does not mean giving up on truth. It means stopping the demand that truth arrive in a specific form. Sometimes the truth is silence. Sometimes it is absence. Sometimes it is inconsistency. These truths are uncomfortable, but they are still truths. The Stoics believe that peace comes from accepting what is revealed, not insisting on what is withheld. Another hidden aspect of closure-seeking is self-doubt. When you don't get explanations, the mind often turns inward. It asks what you did wrong, what you missed, what you could have changed. This self-questioning can become self-blame. Closure feels like it would finally settle these doubts. Stoicism dissolves this by separating responsibility from outcome. You are responsible for your intentions and actions, not for how others respond. Their silence does not define your worth. Their lack of explanation does not mean you were wrong. This clarity removes the sting of unanswered questions. The need for closure also keeps emotions frozen in time. As long as you are waiting for an ending, part of you stays in the moment of disruption. You revisit it mentally. You keep it active. Stoicism frees you by allowing emotional completion without narrative completion. You do not need the story to end for the feeling to resolve. This is a subtle but powerful insight. Emotions resolve through feeling and release, not through explanation. The body does not need a reason to relax. It needs safety and acceptance. Stoicism creates this safety internally. Another reason closure feels necessary is social conditioning. Stories are supposed to have endings. Conflicts are supposed to be resolved. Apologies are supposed to be exchanged. When life does not follow this structure, it feels wrong. Stoicism reminds you that life is not a story. It is a process. Processes do not require endings. They require movement. Letting go of closure also means letting go of the fantasy of the perfect conversation, the one where you say exactly the right thing, where the other person listens fully, where everything is understood. This fantasy is seductive. It keeps the mind rehearsing. It keeps the past alive. Stoicism gently releases this fantasy by grounding you in what actually happened, not what could have happened. This does not mean suppressing feelings. It means expressing them in ways that do not depend on external response. Writing, reflection, honest acknowledgement. These allow emotional movement without needing permission. The Stoics valued self-dialogue over external validation. They believed that clarity achieved internally is more stable than clarity granted by others. Releasing closure also involves accepting limits. Limits of communication, limits of awareness, limits of timing. People cannot always give what you need when you need it. This is not always a choice. Sometimes it is a limitation. Accepting limits reduces frustration. Another layer of closure seeking is the desire to feel seen, to have your experience recognized. This is a deep human need. When it goes unmet, pain lingers. Stoicism does not deny this need. It simply expands where recognition can come from. You can recognize your own experience. You can validate your own feelings. You can honor your own story without needing external confirmation. This self-recognition is not isolation. It is self-respect. Stoicism teaches that dignity comes from how you carry your experience, not from how others interpret it. Letting go of closure also frees you from constant retrospection. You stop revisiting the same events. You stop asking the same questions. Mental energy returns to the present. Attention becomes available for what is actually happening now. This shift often brings relief that feels surprising. You realize how much time was spent waiting for something that never arrived. The Stoics were practical. They did not wait for ideal conditions to live well. They lived well with what was available. This practicality applies here. You do not need perfect understanding to move forward. You need acceptance of uncertainty. Uncertainty is not an enemy. It is a condition of life. Another benefit of releasing closure is resilience. When you stop needing explanations, you become less vulnerable to disappointment. You stop expecting others to complete your emotional process. This makes you stronger, not harder. Strength here is flexibility, the ability to adapt without breaking. Stoicism also teaches that not everything deserves your attention forever. Some events are meant to be acknowledged and then left behind, not because they were small, but because they are complete. Completion does not require answers, it requires decision. You decide that you no longer need to revisit this. You decide that your life is bigger than this unresolved moment. You decide to invest attention elsewhere. This decision is an act of self-care. As you practice releasing closure, you may notice moments of resistance. The mind may say, "But I still don't understand." That may be true. Understanding may never come. Peace does not need it. Peace needs permission. Giving yourself permission to move on without closure is one of the most liberating acts available. It breaks dependency. It restores agency. It quiets mental noise. This does not mean you never reflect. It means you stop circling. As the mind releases its grip on unanswered questions, as it stops waiting for explanations and endings, attention naturally turns outward again. Not toward the past this time, but toward the subtle signals that come from others. A smile, a compliment, a criticism, a raised eyebrow, a moment of approval, a moment of dismissal. Even when you no longer need closure, these signals can still move you more than you realize. They can lift you up or pull you down without asking permission. This is where another form of attachment quietly waits. There is a belief many people carry without questioning it, that praise feels good and criticism feels bad, and that this difference is natural and harmless. Stoicism looks closer. It sees that both praise and insult have the same power when you are attached to them. They both place your inner state in someone else's hands. They both make your peace conditional. They both pull you away from your center. Criticism is easier to recognize as dangerous. It hurts, it stings, it lingers. You replay it. You defend against it. You build armor around it. Praise, on the other hand, feels like relief. Validation. Proof that you are on the right path. Because it feels pleasant, it is rarely questioned. But Stoicism warns that praise is often more seductive and therefore more controlling than insult. When praise becomes important, dependence begins. The moment you start caring deeply about being admired, you start adjusting yourself to maintain admiration. You choose words carefully. You shape behavior subtly. You hesitate before acting honestly if honesty risks approval. This adjustment may be small at first, barely noticeable. Over time, it creates inner tension. You are no longer acting purely from values. You are performing. Criticism then becomes terrifying, not because it is true, but because it threatens the supply of praise. Stoicism teaches that praise and insult are two sides of the same chain. If one has the power to elevate you, the other has the power to wound you. You cannot be immune to one without becoming immune to the other. This does not mean becoming cold or indifferent. It means becoming anchored. The Stoics believed that worth is internal, not earned through applause, not destroyed through disapproval. When worth is stable inside, praise becomes pleasant but unnecessary, and criticism becomes informative but not devastating. Most people confuse detachment with numbness. They think being untouched by praise or insult means not caring at all. Stoicism does not remove care. It removes dependency. You can appreciate kind words without needing them. You can hear criticism without collapsing under it. Praise often feels like safety. It reassures you that you belong, that you are acceptable, that you are seen. These are deep human needs. Stoicism does not deny them. It simply asks you not to outsource them entirely. When acceptance comes only from outside, the inner world remains unstable. One good comment can lift your mood. One negative reaction can ruin your day. This emotional volatility is exhausting. Stoicism restores balance by shifting the source of validation inward. You become guided by conscience rather than reaction. You measure your actions against your values, not against applause. This does not isolate you, it stabilizes you. Another danger of praise is identity inflation. When you are praised for something, intelligence, kindness, strength, you may begin to protect that label. You avoid situations where you might fail. You resist growth because growth requires being a beginner again. You cling to a version of yourself that was admired. This attachment limits development. Stoicism keeps identity flexible. You are not your reputation. You are not your strengths. You are a practitioner of virtue, always learning. Praise becomes feedback, not definition. Criticism, on the other hand, often triggers shame. The inner narrator uses it as evidence. See, this proves something is wrong with you. Stoicism dissolves this by separating action from identity. A mistake does not define you. A flaw does not negate your worth. Criticism becomes data, not a verdict. When you detach from both praise and insult, you gain freedom of movement. You can act without scanning for approval. You can speak without fear of backlash. You can rest without guilt. You can change your mind without embarrassment. This freedom brings calm. The Stoics observed that people who chase praise become anxious. They are always watching reactions, always adjusting, always tense. People who fear criticism become defensive. They avoid exposure. They hide parts of themselves. Both are trapped. Detachment breaks both traps. Another subtle effect of praise dependence is comparison. When you are praised, you feel ahead. When others are praised, you may feel behind. This comparison breeds envy and insecurity. Stoicism removes this by reminding you that praise reflects preferences, not truth. It reflects the observer's values, not your essence. When you stop measuring yourself through others' reactions, comparison loses power. Stoicism also teaches that praise is often accidental. It depends on timing, context, mood, and bias. Many deserving actions go unnoticed. Many shallow actions are applauded. Building your self-worth on such a system is unstable. This is not cynicism, it is realism. The Stoics preferred quiet excellence, acting well regardless of recognition. This creates inner consistency. You are the same person whether watched or alone. Detachment from praise also protects sincerity. You stop saying what sounds good and start saying what is true. You stop doing what looks impressive and start doing what is right. This sincerity feels lighter. You no longer carry the weight of maintaining an image. Criticism loses its sting when you no longer need to appear perfect. Another benefit of detachment is emotional resilience. Praise can disappear without warning. Public opinion can shift overnight. If your peace depends on approval, you live at the mercy of change. Stoicism anchors peace in something more durable. Values do not fluctuate like opinions. This detachment also deepens relationships. When you are not fishing for praise, interactions become more honest. You listen without waiting for affirmation. You give without needing acknowledgement. This creates genuine connection. The Stoics believed that the best relationships are those where neither praise nor insult controls behavior. Respect replaces evaluation. Detachment does not mean ignoring feedback. Stoicism values improvement. It simply separates feedback from self-worth. You can learn from criticism without hating yourself. You can accept praise without becoming inflated. This balanced stance keeps the ego quiet. Another important insight is that praise and insult often say more about the speaker than about you. Praise reflects what someone values. Criticism reflects what someone fears or dislikes. When you see this clearly, emotional reactions soften. You stop taking things personally. Stoicism encourages this perspective, not to dismiss others, but to contextualize their responses. This context reduces emotional charge. There is also peace in realizing that no one sees you completely. Praise and insult are partial. They highlight one aspect and ignore others. Building identity on partial views creates distortion. Stoicism keeps identity rooted in inner alignment, not external fragments. As detachment deepens, you may notice moments where praise still feels tempting, or criticism still stings. This is normal. Conditioning does not disappear instantly. Each time you notice attachment, you return to center. Center is not silence. It is steadiness. This steadiness allows you to enjoy praise without chasing it, to hear criticism without shrinking, to live without constant emotional fluctuation. The Stoics did not aim to be admired. They aimed to be unshaken. This unshaken quality does not make life dull. It makes it rich. You experience moments fully without being pulled apart by reaction. You act with integrity regardless of response. As the pull of praise weakens and the sting of criticism fades, something unfamiliar opens up. The emotional spikes soften. The highs don't rise as sharply. The lows don't cut as deeply. And in this new balance, a quiet fear often appears. Not loud, not dramatic, just a subtle unease that asks, if I'm no longer driven by reaction, what's left? This is the fear of emotional emptiness, the fear that without constant feeling, something essential will disappear. Many people mistake intensity for aliveness. They believe that if emotions aren't strong, life must be dull. That if there is no constant pull, no drama, no urgency, no emotional charge, then something is wrong. When emotional reactivity decreases, the mind sometimes panics. It looks around and says, "This feels flat, this feels empty." But Stoicism sees this moment differently. It recognizes it as a doorway. Emotional emptiness is often misunderstood because the mind has been trained to equate stimulation with meaning. From an early age, attention is pulled toward what excites, disturbs, or moves strongly. Calm is rarely celebrated. Silence is often avoided. Stillness is treated as absence rather than presence. Stoicism reclaims stillness as a form of fullness. When the emotional noise quiets, the first thing many people notice is discomfort. The body is no longer bracing or reacting. The mind is no longer chasing or resisting. There is space. And space can feel unsettling if you are not used to it. The mind wants something to do, something to fix, something to feel. In the absence of these, it labels the moment as emptiness. But this label is premature. Silence is not a void. It is unoccupied awareness. It is attention without direction. It is the state before interpretation, and it feels unfamiliar because it has been crowded out for so long. The Stoics understood that most emotional suffering comes from excess. Excess thought, excess judgment, excess desire. When these fall away, what remains is not nothing. What remains is clarity. Clarity does not announce itself with excitement. It arrives quietly. It feels neutral at first, calm, open, unattached. This neutrality is often mistaken for numbness, but numbness is blocked feeling. Clarity is unblocked awareness. There is a difference between not feeling and not being overwhelmed by feeling. Fear of emotional emptiness often comes from the belief that emotions are what make life meaningful. Without them, life seems mechanical. Stoicism challenges this belief by shifting where meaning is located. Meaning does not come from how strongly you feel. It comes from how wisely you live. A calm mind can still feel joy. A still heart can still care deeply. But these feelings are no longer chaotic. They are grounded. They do not demand. They do not consume. Another reason silence feels threatening is because it removes distraction. In silence, unresolved things can surface. The mind fears this. It prefers noise because noise keeps discomfort hidden. Emotional emptiness feels like exposure. Stoicism does not rush you through this exposure. It invites you to stay, to notice what arises without reacting. Often, what arises is not pain, but habit. The habit of reaching for stimulation, the habit of emotional movement. When you stay with silence, you begin to notice its texture. It is not blank. It is spacious. Thoughts come and go. Sensations appear and fade. You are present for all of it, without being pulled into any single thread. This presence is deeply stabilizing. The Stoics trained themselves to value this inner stillness. They saw it as the ground from which wise action emerges. When the mind is quiet, perception sharpens. You see things as they are, not as your emotions color them. Fear of emptiness also comes from identity. Many people define themselves by what they feel. I'm passionate. I'm intense. I feel deeply. These identities can feel threatened when emotional reactivity decreases. You may wonder who you are without emotional turbulence. Stoicism answers this by redefining identity. You are not your emotions. You are your capacity to respond with reason, compassion, and integrity. Emotional depth is not measured by intensity. but by understanding. Letting go of the fear of emptiness allows emotional maturity to develop. You stop chasing feelings to prove you are alive. You stop avoiding stillness because you fear it means something is missing. Instead, you begin to trust calm. Another misunderstanding is that silence equals boredom. Boredom arises when the mind wants stimulation and does not get it. Silence is different. Silence is when the mind no longer demands stimulation. It rests. Rest is not dullness, it is recovery. Stoicism values this rest because it restores the nervous system. Constant emotional movement keeps the body in alert mode. Stillness allows regulation. Over time, this regulation brings resilience. You become less reactive, not because you care less, but because your system is no longer overloaded. There is also fear that without emotional highs, joy will disappear. Stoicism shows that joy does not disappear. It changes quality. It becomes quieter, steadier, less dependent on conditions. This joy does not spike and crash. It hums. This kind of joy is often overlooked because it does not shout. Silence also allows insight. When the emotional surface is calm, deeper understanding becomes visible. You notice patterns, you see connections, you recognize habits. These insights are subtle. They require stillness to be perceived. Fear of emptiness often blocks this insight. When the mind fills every quiet moment, it never hears what is underneath. The Stoics practiced silence intentionally, not isolation, but inner quiet. They used it to examine thoughts, clarify values, and reset perspective. Silence was a tool, not a threat. Another aspect of this fear is the belief that stillness equals passivity, that if you are not emotionally charged, you will not act. Stoicism shows the opposite. Calm action is more effective than reactive action. Decisions made from stillness are clearer. Effort becomes more precise.
Action does not require agitation. Letting go of the fear of emptiness also changes how you relate to solitude. Alone time becomes nourishing instead of uncomfortable. You are no longer trying to fill space. You are inhabiting it. This does not mean withdrawing from life. It means engaging from a centered place. Emotional emptiness is often just the absence of unnecessary noise. Once you stop fearing it, you realize it is not empty at all. It is full of potential. It is where new perspectives arise. It is where healing consolidates. Stoicism encourages this trust. Trust that silence is not abandonment. Trust that stillness is not stagnation. Trust that calm does not erase meaning. It reveals it. As emotional stillness becomes familiar and silence no longer feels threatening, a deeper belief begins to surface. It has been there quietly for years, shaping disappointment and fueling quiet anger. It sounds reasonable, even moral. It says, if I do the right thing, life should respond in kind. When this belief breaks, suffering often begins. This is the illusion of fairness. There is a hidden contract many people carry without realizing it. A contract with life that says effort will be rewarded, kindness will be returned, patience will be noticed, and pain will be compensated. When life violates this contract, as it often does, the result is not just sadness, it is shock, confusion, a sense of betrayal, not by people, but by existence itself. Stoicism begins where this illusion ends. The expectation of fairness is deeply rooted. From early life, rules are taught. Do good, receive good. Follow the rules, be protected. Work hard, succeed.
These patterns work just enough of the time to feel true. But reality is not governed by moral symmetry. Events unfold based on countless variables, most of which have nothing to do with merit. When fairness is expected, every hardship feels personal. When it is not, hardship becomes information instead of insult. Stoic realism does not say life is unfair in a bitter sense. It says life is impartial. Events happen without consulting your intentions. Nature does not reward virtue with ease. It offers conditions. You decide how to meet them. This perspective removes a major source of suffering, comparison between what you gave and what you received. Many people suffer not because something bad happened, but because something bad happened despite their effort. They think, after everything I did, this is what I get. This thought keeps resentment alive. Stoicism dissolves it by removing the expectation that life keeps score.
Life does not owe you outcomes. It offers moments.
This is difficult to accept because the belief in fairness provides comfort. It suggests that suffering can be avoided through correct behavior. Letting go of this belief feels risky. It means acknowledging that control is limited, that virtue does not guarantee protection. Stoicism does not deny this risk. It embraces it. Strength, in Stoic terms, does not come from believing life will be fair. It comes from knowing you can respond wisely regardless. The illusion of fairness also fuels anger toward others. When someone succeeds unfairly or escapes consequences, it feels intolerable. When someone harms you without remorse, the injustice feels unbearable. Stoicism does not excuse harm. It removes the emotional demand that the universe correct it on your behalf. Justice, when it appears, is welcome. When it does not, peace must not depend on it. Another way fairness expectation creates suffering is through self-blame. When life goes poorly, you assume you must have done something wrong. If things are unfair, it must be my fault. This belief adds shame to pain. Stoicism removes this layer by separating character from circumstance. Your worth is not measured by outcomes. Releasing the illusion of fairness also frees you from bitterness toward the past. Many people replay events asking how things could have been more just. This replay keeps the mind anchored to grievance. Stoic realism accepts that the past unfolded according to conditions that cannot be undone. Acceptance does not approve. It ends resistance. Resistance is where suffering multiplies. Stoicism teaches that fairness is a human concept, not a natural law. Expecting life to operate by moral standards is like expecting weather to follow preference. Storms do not punish. Sun does not reward. They occur. Understanding this does not make you cold. It makes you resilient. Resilience grows when you stop asking life to make sense morally and start asking yourself how to live well practically. Another consequence of fairness illusion is entitlement, not arrogance, but expectation. You expect rest because you worked hard. You expect loyalty because you were loyal. You expect peace because you endured. When these expectations are unmet, frustration grows. Stoicism invites you to act without attaching guarantees. You choose virtue because it is right, not because it ensures comfort. This removes disappointment at its root. Virtue becomes its own reward. This shift also reduces envy. When you believe life should be fair, others' success can feel like theft. When you accept impartiality, success becomes circumstance, not offense. You focus on your path instead of measuring theirs.
Stoicism does not deny inequality. It refuses to internalize it.
Another layer is how fairness expectation shapes patience. You may tolerate suffering believing it will pay off later. When it doesn't, despair follows. Stoicism encourages action without deferred emotional payment. You live well now, not for later compensation. Living well becomes immediate, not conditional. This realism also sharpens boundaries. When you stop expecting fairness, you stop over-giving in hope of return. You give intentionally. You act with clarity. You choose where to invest energy. This reduces burnout. Releasing fairness illusion also deepens compassion. When you stop assuming others should know better, you see limitation instead of malice. This does not excuse harm, it reduces internal friction. Compassion here is not softness, it is understanding. Stoicism restores strength by aligning expectations with reality. Strength is not insisting life conform. Strength is adapting without breaking.
This alignment brings calm. You stop being surprised by hardship. You stop feeling singled out. You meet difficulty with steadiness. There is also freedom in knowing that fairness is not required for meaning. Meaning comes from how you respond, not from how life treats you.
This understanding allows you to move forward without bitterness. As the belief in fairness loosens and life is no longer expected to explain itself, the mind begins to lose one of its favorite justifications for staying busy. And yet, even without that belief, it often finds another way to stay occupied. It turns inward, it rewinds, it replays, not because it enjoys it, but because it has learned to survive this way. This is emotional rehearsal, and it quietly consumes more energy than almost anything else. There is a specific kind of tiredness that sleep does not fix. A fatigue that comes from living the same moment again and again in your head. Conversations replayed with better words. Arguments revised with sharper clarity. Future encounters practiced endlessly so you won't be caught off guard. The body sits still, but the mind runs marathons. Emotional rehearsal feels useful. It feels like preparation. It feels like processing. But most of the time, it is neither. It is rumination disguised as responsibility. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology named it. They saw how the mind rehearses not to solve problems, but to seek control. When something emotional happens, the mind tries to prevent pain from repeating. It replays events, hoping to extract a perfect response. A flawless sentence, a decisive moment where everything turns out differently. But the past does not respond to improvement. Every replay drains life force because it asks the nervous system to relive emotion without resolution. The body reacts as if the event is happening again. Heart rate changes, muscles tighten, stress hormones release. The mind thinks it is thinking, but the body thinks it is surviving. This is why emotional rehearsal is exhausting. It often starts innocently. You revisit a moment because it hurt. You want to understand it. That makes sense. But soon, the mind slips from understanding into looping. The same scene plays again with slight variations. Each time the emotional charge remains. No new information arrives. No relief follows. Stoicism draws a clear line here. Reflection has an end. Rehearsal does not. Reflection looks forward. Rehearsal circles. One of the reasons emotional rehearsal is so persistent is fear. Fear of being unprepared. Fear of being misunderstood again. Fear of repeating mistakes. The mind believes that if it rehearses enough, it can prevent future pain. But pain does not follow scripts. Life does not announce itself before it arrives. Rehearsal creates the illusion of readiness, while keeping you trapped in yesterday. Another reason rehearsal continues is unfinished emotion. When feelings are not fully felt in the moment, because it wasn't safe, or you didn't have time, or you had to hold it together, they linger. The mind replays the situation, hoping to complete the emotional cycle. But replaying the story is not the same as feeling the emotion. Stoicism teaches you to separate these. When an emotion arises, feel it directly, in the body, without narrative, without dialogue, just sensation. This allows the emotion to move and resolve. Replaying the story keeps it stuck in thought instead of allowing it to pass through awareness. The Stoics were clear. Suffering increases when emotion is fed by thought. Emotional rehearsal also feeds identity. You start seeing yourself as the person who was wronged, dismissed, or misunderstood. Each replay reinforces that identity. The story becomes familiar. Letting it go feels like losing a part of yourself. Stoicism challenges this attachment by reminding you that identity is not built from what happened, but from how you live now. Rehearsal anchors you to a version of yourself that no longer needs to be carried. Another trap of rehearsal is imagined conversations. You prepare speeches for people who are not present. You argue with versions of them that only exist in your head. These conversations feel intense and real, but they never resolve anything. They only deepen emotional investment. The Stoics would say this is misplaced effort. You are spending energy where no action is possible. Action belongs in the present. Rehearsal lives in fiction. One of the most draining forms of rehearsal is self-defense. You imagine future criticism and rehearse responses. This keeps the mind in constant vigilance. You are never at rest because you are always preparing to be judged. Stoicism releases this by returning you to what is within your control. You cannot control how others respond. You can control how you act when the moment actually arrives. Preparing endlessly for imagined scenarios weakens your ability to respond naturally when real ones appear. Trust replaces rehearsal. Another reason emotional rehearsal persists is the belief that thinking equals progress. That if you just think long enough, clarity will arrive. Sometimes it does. Often it doesn't. When thought loops without producing new insight, it has become compulsion. Stoicism values clarity, not volume of thought. The Stoics practiced mental discipline. When they noticed the mind returning to the same place without gain, they gently redirected attention, not with force, with choice. How is this thought serving me right now? Is this helping me act wisely? If not, they let it go. Letting go here does not mean pushing away. It means withdrawing energy. Energy follows attention. When you stop feeding rehearsal, it weakens. Another important distinction is between learning and reliving. Learning extracts insight and moves forward. Reliving keeps emotion active. Stoicism encourages you to learn once, clearly, and then move on. This does not mean forgetting. It means not reopening wounds unnecessarily. Emotional rehearsal also steals presence. While your mind is replaying yesterday, today passes unnoticed. Small joys are missed. Opportunities for connection fade. Life becomes something you think about instead of something you experience. Stoicism restores presence by grounding attention in the senses. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel physically right now? These questions pull attention out of mental loops and back into reality. Reality is rarely as threatening as rehearsal suggests. Stopping emotional rehearsal does not happen instantly. The mind will return to old loops out of habit. Each return is an opportunity to practice redirection, not judgment, not frustration. Practice. Over time, the loops lose momentum. Another reason rehearsal feels necessary is the desire for control over outcome. You believe that if you rehearse enough, you can guarantee a better future. Stoicism teaches that certainty is not available. Adaptability is. Adaptability comes from presence, not preparation. There is also grief underneath rehearsal. Grief for what was said, what wasn't said, what could have been different. Allowing this grief to be felt directly reduces the need to replay. The mind rehearses because the heart hasn't finished feeling. When feeling is allowed, rehearsal fades. Stoicism emphasizes courage here. Courage to feel without scripting. Courage to let moments be incomplete. Courage to trust yourself in real time. Another subtle cost of rehearsal is self-criticism. You replay mistakes to punish yourself, to ensure you learned your lesson. This punishment does not produce wisdom. It produces shame. Stoicism replaces punishment with understanding. Understanding does not require repetition. Letting go of emotional rehearsal also improves sleep. Many people lie awake replaying conversations. The body is exhausted, but the mind won't rest. Stoic practice teaches you to set boundaries with thought. Night is for rest, not review. This boundary is an act of self-respect. Over time, as rehearsal stops, you notice an increase in available energy. Mental clarity improves. Emotional recovery shortens. You feel less drained by interactions because you are no longer reliving them afterward. Life begins to feel lighter. The Stoics believed that peace is not achieved by solving every problem in advance, but by trusting your capacity to respond when needed. This trust grows as you stop rehearsing. When you let go of emotional rehearsal, you stop living in anticipation and return to participation. As emotional rehearsal begins to loosen, as the mind stops replaying old scenes on repeat, something else quietly takes its place. A new focus, a new goal. Not about the past this time, but about the future of your inner life. The thought sounds hopeful, even responsible. I just want to be healed. But hidden inside this wish is a pressure that can keep you stuck longer than the pain ever did. There is a subtle tension that forms the moment healing becomes an outcome instead of a process. You start monitoring yourself, checking symptoms, measuring progress, asking whether you are there yet. The mind turns inward not with compassion, but with evaluation, and the very thing meant to bring freedom becomes another source of strain. Stoicism notices this paradox clearly. The desire to be healed can quietly delay healing. When you become attached to the idea of being healed, you turn healing into a destination, a finish line, a version of yourself you are supposed to reach. This creates distance between who you are now and who you think you should be. That distance breeds dissatisfaction. You are always arriving late to your own life. Healing becomes something you chase instead of something you live through. Many people don't realize how much effort they put into getting better. They read, reflect, analyze, optimize. They search for signs that the work is paying off. They compare their current state to an imagined future where everything feels light, calm, resolved. This comparison keeps the nervous system alert. You are no longer resting into the process. You are judging it. Stoicism teaches that peace cannot emerge under surveillance. The body and mind heal through safety, not scrutiny. When you constantly ask, Am I healed yet? You send a signal that something is wrong now, that the present moment is insufficient. This keeps the system tense. Tension slows integration. This is why obsessing over healing outcomes often produces the opposite effect. You are trying to escape discomfort while inadvertently reinforcing it. The Stoics would say this is another form of attachment. Not attachment to pain, but attachment to relief. And attachment to relief keeps pain relevant. True healing is quiet. It unfolds when attention shifts away from self-monitoring and toward living. It does not announce completion. It does not arrive as a dramatic moment. It reveals itself through subtle changes, fewer spirals, faster recovery, more spacious reactions. But when you are obsessed with outcome, these changes are overlooked. They are never enough. You are always waiting for the big sign. Stoicism reframes healing entirely. It removes the idea of a final state. Instead of being healed, it focuses on responding wisely in each moment. Healing becomes a byproduct, not a target. This shift is crucial. Another reason attachment to healing outcomes causes suffering is identity. You may see yourself as someone who is healing. This identity can become sticky. You stay oriented toward your wounds because they justify the work. Letting go of the outcome feels like abandoning the narrative. Stoicism gently dissolves this by returning identity to values instead of conditions. You are not a project to complete. You are a person practicing presence, patience, and clarity. There is also fear underneath outcome obsession. Fear that if you stop trying so hard, nothing will change. Fear that effort is the only thing holding things together. This fear misunderstands how change works.
Growth does not require constant pressure. It requires consistency and allowance. Stoicism teaches disciplined acceptance. You take wise actions, rest, reflection, boundaries, but you do not demand immediate results. You plant seeds and allow time to do its work. Another trap is comparison. You see others who seem healed and wonder why you're not there yet. This comparison creates discouragement. Stoicism dissolves it by reminding you that healing is not visible. You cannot see internal regulation. You cannot see private peace. Comparing inner states based on outer appearance is misleading. Detaching from healing outcomes also frees you from self-judgment. When healing is a goal, setbacks feel like failure. A bad day becomes evidence that nothing has improved. This black and white thinking keeps the nervous system oscillating between hope and despair. Stoicism introduces a more stable frame. Progress is not linear. Fluctuation is natural. A calm response today does not erase yesterday's difficulty, and yesterday's difficulty does not erase today's clarity. This understanding reduces emotional volatility. Another subtle cost of outcome focus is postponement of life. You tell yourself you'll fully live once you're healed. You delay joy, connection, creativity, rest. Healing becomes a prerequisite for living. Stoicism rejects this postponement. You're allowed to live now exactly as you are. Healing happens alongside living, not before it. This is deeply liberating. The Stoics believed that the present moment is sufficient for practice. You do not need to be healed to act with wisdom. You do not need to be free of pain to be free in action. Freedom is not the absence of difficulty, it is the absence of resistance. When you detach from the outcome of healing, you stop asking life to deliver a version of you.
You start meeting life as you are. This meeting itself is healing. Another important insight is that healing is not something you do to yourself. It is something that happens when conditions allow. You can create supportive conditions, but you cannot force resolution. Forcing creates tension. Tension delays release. Stoicism encourages patience without passivity. You continue to show up. You continue to practice awareness. You continue to make choices aligned with values. But you stop checking the scoreboard. There is also humility in this approach. You accept that some things resolve slowly, some things change quietly, some things integrate over years. This humility reduces frustration. Frustration is often the signal that expectation is outpacing reality. Detaching from healing outcomes also changes how you relate to discomfort. Instead of seeing it as a sign of failure, you see it as part of the process. This reduces fear. Fear amplifies sensation. Calm allows sensation to pass. Stoicism teaches you to coexist with discomfort without making it a problem. This coexistence often shortens its duration. Another benefit is increased trust in yourself. When you stop micromanaging healing, you learn that you can handle whatever arises. You don't panic when old feelings resurface. You don't interpret them as regression. You meet them with steadiness. This steadiness is the real marker of healing. The Stoics never aimed to eliminate emotion. They aimed to reduce disturbance. Disturbance comes from attachment to outcomes, timelines, and ideals. Letting go of the outcome of healing removes one of the last ideals holding you hostage. You stop chasing a version of yourself. You stop waiting to arrive. You start inhabiting. As this detachment deepens, you may notice a surprising effect. Moments of peace appear spontaneously, not because you earned them, but because you stopped blocking them. These moments come and go without announcement. They are not trophies, they are glimpses. Over time, glimpses become familiar. Healing reveals itself not as a destination, but as a way of being. Less reactive, more present, less afraid of feeling, more comfortable with uncertainty. This is emotional freedom. As the chase for healing outcomes fades, as the pressure to arrive finally softens, something deeper becomes visible. Not a symptom, not a goal, but a familiar voice that has been quietly organizing your life for years. A voice that explains who you are, why things happened, and what everything means. This voice feels personal, honest, necessary. And yet, it may be the last thing standing between you and peace. This is the story you tell about yourself. Every person carries a narrative. It begins early, shaped by experiences, reinforced by memory, and polished through repetition. It answers questions like, who am I? What kind of life do I have? What always happens to me? This story does not live only in words. It lives in expectations, reactions, and emotional habits. Most of the time it runs quietly in the background, unnoticed, until you start letting go. The moment you stop chasing healing, the story becomes louder, because it no longer has a role to play. Personal mythology is not a lie. It is a construction. It is how the mind makes sense of complexity. It simplifies life into a narrative arc with themes, causes, and conclusions. This can be comforting. Stories provide coherence. They explain suffering. They give identity. But they also lock experience into fixed meaning. Stoicism invites you to question this fixation. The Stoics understood that suffering often persists not because events continue, but because stories do. You may have let go of resentment, released emotional debt, and stopped rehearsing the past. Yet the story remains. It keeps labeling experiences. It keeps interpreting moments through an old lens. It keeps saying, "This is who I am."
And as long as that sentence continues, peace remains conditional.
The story you tell about yourself often sounds like truth because it has been repeated so many times. I'm the one who struggles. I'm always overlooked. Things never work out for me. I had to grow up fast. These statements may reflect real experiences, but they are not the whole reality. They are selected interpretations.
Stoicism does not ask you to replace these stories with positive ones. It asks you to loosen your grip on all of them.
When identity is tied to narrative, the present moment is never enough. Everything is filtered through memory. New experiences are interpreted as confirmation. The story keeps proving itself. This is how the past colonizes the present. Stoic philosophy dismantles personal mythology by separating fact from meaning. Events happen, interpretations follow. You can acknowledge what happened without turning it into a permanent explanation of who you are. This distinction is subtle but powerful. The story you tell about yourself also shapes emotional reactions. If your story says you are someone who is abandoned, every silence feels dangerous. If your story says you are someone who must be strong, rest feels irresponsible. If your story says you are broken, joy feels suspicious. These reactions are not responses to reality. They are responses to narrative. Stoicism restores freedom by returning attention to what is actually happening now, not what this moment symbolizes, not what it proves, just what it is. Another reason personal mythology is hard to release is familiarity. The story feels like home. Even when it is painful, it is known. Letting it go can feel like losing yourself. You may ask, who am I without this story? Stoicism answers calmly. You are here. You are breathing. You are aware. That is enough. Identity does not require narrative. Presence does not need explanation. The Stoics believe that clinging to identity is a source of suffering. Identity freezes you in time. It turns growth into contradiction. If you are this kind of person, change feels like betrayal. You resist new possibilities because they don't fit the story. Letting go of the story allows movement. This does not mean erasing memory. It means releasing the authority memory has over meaning. You stop asking the past to define the present. Stoicism teaches that the self is not a story but a faculty. The faculty of choice, of attention, of response. These are active now, not historical. When you shift identity from narrative to capacity, peace becomes accessible. You are no longer obligated to feel what the story says you should feel. You respond to what is here. Another trap of personal mythology is justification. The story explains why you react the way you do. This is just how I am. This explanation can block responsibility. Stoicism gently removes the excuse without adding blame. It reminds you that while conditioning exists, choice still matters. You are influenced, not determined. Letting go of the story does not mean denying influence. It means not being ruled by it. The story also shapes expectations. You expect certain outcomes because they fit the narrative. When something different happens, discomfort arises. Stoicism reduces this discomfort by loosening narrative expectations. You become open to surprise. Surprise is not a threat when identity is flexible. Another reason stories persist is because they make suffering meaningful. If pain fits into a story, it feels purposeful. Letting go of the story can make pain feel pointless. This is uncomfortable. Stoicism reframes meaning. Meaning does not come from narrative coherence. It comes from how you meet what arises. You do not need a story to live with integrity. Stoicism values simplicity. The more layers of interpretation you remove, the lighter experience becomes. You stop narrating yourself constantly. You stop analyzing what everything says about you.
This quieting is not emptiness, it is relief.
The present moment does not care about your story. It asks only for attention. When you live without constant self-narration, emotions move more freely. They are not interpreted as evidence. They are just feelings. They arise and pass.
This reduces internal conflict.
Another effect of letting go of the story is compassion. When you see your own story as constructed, you see others' stories the same way. You stop taking behavior personally. You recognize conditioning. This softens judgment. Stoicism encourages this perspective not to excuse harm, but to reduce suffering. The story also affects ambition. You may chase goals that fit the narrative instead of those aligned with values. Letting go of the story frees ambition from identity. You pursue what matters now, not what maintains consistency. Consistency shifts from story to principle.
This release also changes how you experience time. Without narrative, moments are not rushed toward conclusions. You are less concerned with how things will turn out. You are more engaged with how things are. Engagement brings vitality.
One of the most liberating aspects of letting go of personal mythology is silence. The inner voice stops explaining. Life stops being a commentary. You experience moments directly, without reference. This directness feels unfamiliar at first, then it feels peaceful. The Stoics practiced this by returning to basics: breath, body, action, thought as tool, not narrator. They did not eliminate thought, they used it deliberately. Letting go of the story is not an act of force, it is an act of curiosity. You notice when the story arises. You question its usefulness. You allow it to pass.
Over time, it loses grip.
This does not mean you never reflect on your life. Reflection becomes intentional, not compulsive. You choose when to tell a story. You are not told by it. As this practice deepens, identity becomes lighter. You are less invested in who you have been, more open to who you are becoming, more present with who you are now. Peace emerges not because the story improved, but because it loosened. You've just walked through layers most people never slow down enough to see. You released the need to be understood. You learned the difference between clarity and numbness. You loosened identities built from pain, futures that never arrived, and suffering that stayed only because it felt familiar. You mourned what didn't happen without letting bitterness take root. You set down the weight of legacy, timing, judgment, resentment, rehearsal, and self-story. You stopped chasing healing as an outcome and started living it as a way of being. You chose humility over righteousness, presence over performance, acceptance over resistance. What remains is not emptiness. What remains is space. And in that space, the mind rests. The body softens. Life becomes simpler, not easier, but clearer. Stoicism does not promise a life without pain. It offers something far more reliable: freedom from unnecessary suffering. Not by controlling the world, but by releasing what was never yours to carry. If something in this meditation reached you, if one insight landed deeper than the others, leave a comment with the words, "I let go." Not for me, for yourself. So you remember this moment of release.
And if this kind of calm, grounded wisdom supports you, subscribe to the channel. More reflections like this are here to help you return to center, again and again.
Take a breath, carry less, and move forward lighter than you arrived.